Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Putnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Will Mr. Trump go to jail? That was a talk yesterday in New York. Hamas has accepted the peace ceasefire proposal, but Israel rejected any bomb yesterday in Rafah, killing 22 people. Basketball star Brittany Griner speaks about his imprisonment in Russia. Rather, her imprisonment in Russia. Nuclear warfare drills will start in Russia. It is because British weapons are Ukraine using and French troops are in Ukraine. Chinese president is in France and has met with EU president. EU wants China's intervention in Ukraine's war. Russian arrested an American soldier in Far East. More than 80 people died in rains in Brazil. Heavy rain in southeastern Texas. Boeing spacecraft will be launched. Graduation ceremonies have been cancelled due to protest. Yesterday, Wall Street went up. Dow Jones Industrial, Nasdaq, and S&P 500 all went up. Now the news in detail.
On this Monday night, a Manitoba man admits to murdering 4 Indigenous women. Reaction from the victims' families.
It's been all about justice for my cousin.
And why lawyers will argue the accused is not criminally responsible, what it means for the trial. Hamas agrees to a ceasefire deal, why Israel says it falls short.
Save lives, don't talk about fighting in blood.
And why Israel's army orders tens of thousands of Palestinians in Rafah to move. Troubling trend, new numbers reveal a surge of anti-Semitism in Canada. And a Boeing spacecraft ready to launch with a Canadian at mission control.
It's going to be very exciting. It's also going to be very serious.
The high hopes after a troubled decade of development.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is a major development in the case of an accused serial killer in Manitoba. A man charged with murdering 4 Indigenous women in 2022 and disposing of their bodies has now admitted to killing them. Jeremy Skibicki had earlier pleaded not guilty. Today, in a surprise move, his lawyers said he did kill all 4 of the women, but they will argue he is not criminally responsible because of a mental disorder. Police discovered the partial remains of Rebecca Contois in a garbage bin at a Winnipeg landfill in 2022. The bodies of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myran, and a 4th unidentified woman elders have named Buffalo Woman are believed to be in a landfill north of Winnipeg. Melissa Ridgen has our top story on what this means to the victims' families and for the trial.
What was to be the beginning of a 6-week murder trial took a twist on Monday. Jeremy Skibicki has now admitted to 4 murders. His defense was pushing for a trial by judge alone, something the Crown opposed given the high-profile nature of the case, wanting a jury of his peers to decide Skibicki's fate. With this new development Monday, the Crown has now accepted to proceed by judge alone, saying it will keep the wheels of justice turning rather than being bogged down in arguments about having a judge or a jury hear the matter. Families of the victims welcome the development.
We're super ecstatic. Exactly what we wanted. It's been all about justice for my cousin, and we're going to get it. We're going to get it, and we're going to get all for it.
The remains of Harris, Myron, and the unidentified victim are believed to be in a landfill north of Winnipeg, while the partial remains of Contois were found in a landfill south of the city, as well as in a dumpster near Skibicki's apartment in 2022. Police believe he hunted the women who were using shelter services in the downtown core. With this admission today, family now believe they won't have to relive some of the worst of what they were prepared for.
That's definitely a relief.
Families hope that admitting to the murders will speed up this judicial process, and the sooner that wraps, the sooner they believe a landfill search will begin.
The trial to determine if Skibicki was criminally responsible when he killed the 4 women is set to begin on Wednesday. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg. In 2019, the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls concluded thousands of violent acts were not investigated and that the mishandling of cases amounts to genocide. According to Stats Canada, the rate of homicide for Indigenous women is nearly 6 times higher than for non-Indigenous women. Only 53% of murder cases involving Indigenous female victims have led to charges. That's in contrast to 84% of all homicide cases in Canada leading to charges. There are fast-moving developments in the Middle East tonight. The political leader of Hamas has said it accepts a ceasefire proposal put forward by Egypt and Qatar. Late tonight, Israel's war cabinet said, though, it is far from Israel's necessary requirements, and a military assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah is going ahead. Rafah is where about 1.5 million Palestinians are sheltering after they were forced to leave their homes farther north. Now they are being told to flee again. Israel's army has warned about 100,000 people in eastern Rafah to get out immediately. They've been told to go to a so-called humanitarian zone where aid agencies warn there is not enough food, water, and medicine. Tonight, Israelis blocked a major highway in Tel Aviv, demanding their government save the hostages in Gaza and agree to a ceasefire. Crystal Demancing looks at whether that's any closer tonight.
Word of Hamas accepting a ceasefire deal with Israel prompted scenes of jubilation in Rafah. Celebrations, however, might be premature. Israel still needs to accept the deal. Hours earlier, displaced Palestinians in Rafah expressed anger and frustration as they prepared to move again. We're dismantling the tent for the 4th time, says this man, as he heeds Israeli warnings. Israel Defense Forces claim Hamas fighters are hiding in Rafah, and in order to eliminate the threat they pose to Israeli safety, an operation in Rafah will be carried out. Flyers were dropped ordering people to leave 8 zones in the southern city and seek refuge in Han Yunis and Al Mawazi.
The places that people are being told to flee to are largely barren strips of land where there's no running water, sanitation systems, and electricity.
The Norwegian Refugee Council spokesperson tells Global News military action in Rafah will lead to more deaths, destruction, and possibly push more people towards famine. Families of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza also warn the Rafah operation risks their loved ones' lives.
Save lives. Don't talk about fighting in blood.
Local media reports a letter was sent to the Israeli War Cabinet over the weekend from 30 hostage families accusing the Prime Minister of torpedoing a deal and abandoning the hostages. The United States have been pushing Hamas to accept the deal while trying to deter Israel from entering Rafah.
We've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. But we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office issued a statement noting the War Cabinet's decision to move ahead with the Rafah operations. A delegation from Israel will also be sent to continue with ceasefire negotiations. It's worth noting Israel says what Hamas agreed to is far from its initial demands. Donna?
All right, Crystal, in London tonight, thanks. There was a commemorative service at the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa today to mourn the millions of Jews killed during the Second World War. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was there and said it happens at an especially dark period for Jewish Canadians.
You can be a Zionist and strongly support the creation of a Palestinian state living in peace and security alongside Israel, a view I know is shared by many in the Jewish community and across Canada. It's my belief, too. Anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine of global hatred. What starts with Jews never ends with Jews.
Jewish leaders in this country warn of a national crisis after a new report out today shows incidents of anti-Semitism more than doubled in 2023 compared to the year before. Mackenzie Gray reports on the hate crimes people are dealing with and what the numbers reveal.
Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues and shots fired at Jewish schools. Just 2 examples of a concerning national trend.
The pervasiveness with which anti-Semitism permeated into the fabric of our society in 2023 is alarming.
Jewish human rights organization B'nai B'rith outlining the data in a new report. In 2023, the organization received details of 77 violent incidents, 405 cases of in-person harassment, and 462 notices of anti-Semitic vandalism, all substantial increases from the previous year.
The result of the aggressive rise in anti-Semitism is that Jews from coast to coast, after being subjected to dehumanizing levels of hate over the course of the previous year, have been left feeling ostracized and abandoned.
Those self-reported stats backed up by complaints made to police forces across the country. Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Mississauga, and Vancouver have all seen increases in anti-Semitic hate crimes in 2023, which looks to have continued into this year.
Of the 84 hate crimes so far in 2024, 56% are anti-Semitic.
Since Hamas's attack and Israel's invasion into Gaza, there have been widespread protests on both sides in Canada. But even pre-October 7th, hate crimes were a problem. Data from Statistics Canada shows that Jewish Canadians have been the most targeted religious group since 2019, but Islamophobia has been the second most common religious hate crime, with the National Council of Canadian Muslims saying they're concerned about their community safety.
We've seen a vast array of incidents of both Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, and here at NCCM alone we've seen that rise by over 1,300%.
It's likely the true statistics on anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other hate crimes are severely underreported, Donna. The stats can estimating less than a third of all hate-motivated incidents are actually reported to police.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. In Ontario, an independent member of the legislature was kicked out of question period today for wearing a keffiyeh. The scarf, popular with Palestinians, is banned inside legislative chambers.
Sarah Jama, you are named. You must leave the chamber.
2 members of the NDP caucus also put on a keffiyeh and left in solidarity. The checked scarves are widely worn in Arab cultures and have come to symbolize solidarity with Palestinians. They were banned earlier this year after Ontario Speaker concluded they were being worn as a political statement. Jama called it ironic that she was told to leave moments after the House held a moment of silence for Holocaust Remembrance Day.
And while we can spend time to recognize genocides of the past, we struggle as members of this House to recognize genocides of the present.
The keffiyeh ban was loosened today. People can now enter Queen's Park wearing a keffiyeh, but the ban inside the legislative chamber itself remains. The federal government has introduced a bill intended to counter foreign interference. It includes a foreign agent registry and changes to legislation around Canada's spy agency. David Aiken breaks down what's in it and why the government will be hard-pressed to make all the proposed changes in time for the next federal election.
And not respecting countering foreign interference.
The bill tabled Monday includes a suite of measures to counter interference in Canada's democratic processes by the likes of China, India, Iran, and others.
We're taking action to adapt and to respond to a world where life and consequently threats are increasingly moving to the online realm.
It enhances our ability to address transnational threats or violence by foreign governments and those who work on their behalf.
One of those new measures, the creation of a foreign agent registry, an idea critics said is long overdue.
If a Canadian food bank must register to lobby a Liberal minister, paid foreign agents should have to register as well.
Anyone in Canada will be required to register if they go to work for any foreign entity, a government or a foreign business, and if they are engaged in any way in policy development or politics.
This registry would be overseen by an independent Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner.
The bill also creates a new class of crimes involving political interference. It broadens the definition of sabotage, and it gives CSIS new tools to combat clandestine interference. But MPs want more done, and on Wednesday are expected to vote for a motion calling on the government to ban any foreign national involved in foreign interference. The government wants to get the bill through Parliament as fast as it can because it's going to be a year or more after the bill is passed to set up the foreign agent registry and put other measures in place, and that means it's a very tight timeline given that the next general election is scheduled for the fall of 2025. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been found in contempt of court for a 10th time and fined another $1,000. And he was warned again that if he keeps this up, he could end up in jail. The judge in the hush money trial said Trump's statements threaten to interfere with justice and are a direct attack on the rule of law. The gag order bars him from making public comments about witnesses, jurors, and others connected to the criminal case that's underway in a Manhattan courtroom. Boeing goes from taking off to lifting off, coming up the company's historic space mission after years of delays and setbacks. The weather is looking good for tonight's space launch at Florida's Cape Canaveral. This time, Boeing is behind it. The company's reputation with airplanes has taken a hit, but this is a whole new program for Boeing. And as Jackson Prosco reports, it's critical to NASA's mission to use private companies to help transport astronauts, including Canadians, to the International Space Station.
Primed on the launch pad, Boeing's Starliner is ready for liftoff, with humans on board for the very first time. 2 NASA test pilots will put the capsule through its paces on a test flight to the International Space Station.
It's a big moment for NASA. It's a big moment for access to space.
During the launch, Canadian astronaut Joshua Kutrick will be part of the flight control team at Mission Control, serving as capsule communicator. He's been training to fly aboard Starliner himself, and will join its first operational mission next year, Starliner 1.
The company's reputation with airplanes has taken a hit, but this is a whole new program for Boeing. And as Jackson Prosco reports, it's critical to NASA's mission to use private companies to help transport astronauts, including Canadians, to the International Space Station.
Primed on the launch pad, Boeing's Starliner is ready for liftoff, with humans on board for the very first time. 2 NASA test pilots will put the capsule through its paces on a test flight to the International Space Station.
It's a big moment for NASA. It's a big moment for access to space.
During the launch, Canadian astronaut Joshua Kutrick will be part of the flight control team at Mission Control, serving as capsule communicator. He's been training to fly aboard Starliner himself, and will join its first operational mission next year, Starliner 1, a 6-month voyage to the ISS.
What's it going to be like for you tonight watching the launch, knowing that you're on the next mission?
It's going to be very exciting. It's also going to be very serious. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of risk. The stakes are high. We have to be ready to react to anything off-nominal that happens.
If all goes well, Boeing will officially join SpaceX as the second private company capable of launching astronauts into orbit.
So it is a big deal. It gives NASA much more flexibility. It gives commercial activities in Earth orbit much more flexibility.
But Starliner can't escape the bigger problems plaguing Boeing. It's years behind schedule.
And liftoff, the rise of Starliner.
The first test launch failed to reach proper orbit because of computer problems. Then came issues with jammed valves, parachutes, and hundreds of meters of flammable tape found inside the capsule.
Yes, there's been some issues in the past. That's the past. That is not now.
Getting it right will mean a new path for getting astronauts into orbit. NASA and the Canadian Space Agency are both counting on it.
I hope that it gets Canadians excited, because we're just at the very beginning of opportunity in space and access to space. This is a mission that shows us that.
Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
U.S. safety regulators have opened a new probe into the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the company's top-selling wide-body jet. The Federal Aviation Administration will determine if proper inspections were conducted and whether employees falsified aircraft records. Last month, Boeing told the FAA it may not have completed required inspections. Boeing says there is no immediate flight safety issue. The company's safety standards have been under scrutiny for years. Last month, a Boeing engineer came forward with claims about shortcuts during the manufacturing process, and in January, a door plug blew off a 737 MAX 9 mid-flight. Still ahead, could a jailed Palestinian political leader be the key player in Middle East peace? Among the on-again, off-again negotiations for an end to the Israel-Hamas war is the release of hostages held in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. One of those prisoners is a man named Marwan Barghouti. He's been in jail for years, and yet during that time, he's become increasingly popular with Palestinians. It's thought that he is the only person capable of unifying Palestinian factions. Danielle Hamamdin reports on who he is.
In the heart of Ramallah in the West Bank is Mandela Square. The South African is revered here. His struggle against apartheid resonates deeply with Palestinians who call one of their own Palestine's Nelson Mandela.
Security will be achieved by one way, by peace, and peace will be achieved by the end of the occupation.
His name is Marwan Barghouti. He's been in prison since 2002, serving 5 life sentences, convicted of murder and membership in a terrorist organization.
He is a terrorist and he is murdered.
His supporters say the charges were fabricated.
I truly believe that the Israelis are racing.
Arab Barghouti was just 11 when his father was led away in handcuffs.
I still remember the values that he gave us to live by, which is, freedom and justice for all. He has never been a person to speak about the destruction of anyone, including Israel.
Barghouti is a believer in the two-state solution, though when it comes to Israeli soldiers and settlers, he's not been opposed to armed resistance. But prison has not silenced him. He says the most powerful form of resistance against Israel is Palestinian unity. Recent polling shows Palestinians want him at the top, the only one capable of bridging the deep divisions between the various political factions, including Hamas.
He's one of the most amazing people that the world will ever know. It's the greatest name you'll ever hear.
If Barghouti is released, it would mean that Israel would finally have a serious negotiator on the Palestinian side, which many believe is exactly what Israel is trying to avoid.
The Israelis are now really very happy with the situation, the Palestinian situation, where we are now not united. The moment he's out, immediately he will reunite all the Palestinians.
A former chief of the Shin Bet, Israel's security agency, called for his release, saying that Barghouti is the only one who can lead the Palestinians after the war ends.
They will not broke our will for independence and for freedom.
It's a message that endures here, even as hope for lasting peace seems to fade with each passing day. Danielle Hamamdin, Global News, in Ramallah.
Happy anniversary. Next, the UK marks 1 year since the coronation of King Charles. In London, there were ceremonies today to mark 1 year since the coronation of King Charles.
Danielle Hamamdin, Global News, in Ramallah.
Happy anniversary. Next, the UK marks 1 year since the coronation of King Charles. In London, there were ceremonies today to mark 1 year since the coronation of King Charles. He took over from his mother, Queen Elizabeth, who reigned for 70 years. At age 73, he is facing a big personal challenge. The king was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year. The palace hasn't revealed what kind of cancer it is, but he's undergone treatment, and he returned to public duties last week. The party of the year has begun in New York City. The annual Met Gala draws top stars and some daring fashion.
Shoulders, we can see your eyes.
That's Sarah Jessica Parker. The official guest list is top secret, only revealed as people set foot on the red carpet. Zendaya and Jennifer Lopez are co-chairing this year's gala, and they were among the first to arrive. This year's theme is Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion. That is open to interpretation, and there's always competition to see whose outfit goes viral. The annual fundraiser is a huge boost for the Met's Costume Institute. Tickets cost $75,000. This year it's sponsored by TikTok. Lots of these stars have millions of followers on TikTok, but the U.S. president has signed a law that could ban the video sharing platform from the U.S. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Flora Footbridge over the Rideau Canal in Ottawa. Thanks for watching and hope to see.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's ordered 100,000 Palestinians living in eastern Rafah to evacuate ahead of an Israeli offensive on the southern Gaza city, where more than 1.4 million displaced Palestinians have sought refuge. The UN aid agency, UNRWA, warned Israel's attack on Rafah would have devastating consequences and lead to more civilian suffering and deaths. Overnight, Israeli bombardments killed at least 26 people in Rafah, including 11 children.
We fled death and destruction, and we came to Rafah only to find destruction here. Do they want to kill us here? We came seeking safety in Rafah. Where do they want to send us? Where are we to go? The situation is so difficult. We're unable to describe the destruction that we are living in here. Someone feel for us and the tragedy we are living through.
The order to evacuate Rafah came a day after Hamas fighters fired rockets at the Karem Abu Salem crossing, killing 4 Israeli soldiers. This all comes as ceasefire talks appear to have stalled. On the humanitarian front, Cindy McCain, the widow of Senator John McCain, now the head of the World Food Program, told NBC that northern Gaza is in full-blown famine.
What I can explain to you is that there is famine, full-blown famine in the north, and it's moving its way south.
We'll speak to a doctor who just left Gaza about the full-blown famine. He's now in Amman. Protests continue on college campuses across the United States as students call on schools to divest from Israel. At the University of Michigan, students holding Palestinian flags briefly disrupted graduation ceremony Saturday as a plane flew overhead holding a banner that read "Divest from Israel now, free Palestine." At Indiana University in Bloomington, some students walked out of Saturday's commencement and booed the school's president. Planes also circled above that ceremony carrying a banner with a Palestinian flag and the words, "Let Gaza live." At the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, police arrested 25 protesters who'd set up a Gaza solidarity encampment. In Chicago, 68 people were arrested in an encampment outside the Art Institute of Chicago. New York police made 56 arrests early Friday after raiding student encampments at the New School and NYU. Riot police have also cleared a student encampment at USC, the University of Southern California. According to the Associated Press, police have now arrested more than 2,500 students at pro-Palestine protests. That includes 133 arrests on Thursday at SUNY New Paltz, at State University of New York, when police violently raided a student encampment. At the University of Mississippi, officials have opened a probe after video went viral showing a group of white counter-protesters harassing a black protester. One white student was seen imitating a monkey as he mocked her while others screamed, "Lock her up." Meanwhile, school officials at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, have reached an agreement with student protesters and have vowed to work toward divesting from, quote, companies that profit from gross human rights violations and or the occupation of Palestinian territories, unquote. Evergreen College is the alma mater of Rachel Corrie, the American peace activist killed by an Israeli military bulldozer in Gaza in 2003. In Gaza, Palestinians have voiced support for the student protests.
My message for the American students is that we are extremely proud, and their protests and their solidarity with Palestine and with Gaza gave us a glimpse of hope, and they didn't leave us left alone. They didn't leave us feeling helpless.
In Britain, solidarity encampments have also been set up on the same day at Cambridge and Oxford. In other education news, Columbia University in New York is now under a federal investigation for anti-Palestinian discrimination. The Department of Education opened the probe after the group Palestine Legal accused the school of, quote, extreme anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and Islamophobic harassment, unquote. Israeli authorities have taken Al Jazeera off the air inside Israel. On Sunday, police officers raided the network's Jerusalem bureau, seized broadcasting equipment. Israel's Foreign Press Association called it a, quote, dark day for democracy. The move came just 2 days after World Press Freedom Day. Over the past 8 months, Al Jazeera has been one of the only international outlets with reporters on the ground inside Gaza. We'll have more on that story, speaking with the managing editor of Al Jazeera in Doha after headlines. Tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets Saturday in nationwide rallies calling for a deal to free the hostages and to hold early elections in Israel. Danny Elgart, whose brother is being held in Gaza, addressed the protest in Tel Aviv.
Bibi, we call you to reach a ceasefire deal which secures the release of all hostages. Ceasefire that secures the release of hostages. The war actually didn't end, Bibi, but know that the war ended. You can't lie to us. You are taking more time so you and Ben Gvir can stay in power. You are taking more time so you will stay in power. You don't care about the 133 or 132 hostages. An operation in Rafah will cause the death of the hostages. You don't have a mandate to kill 132 citizens of Israel.
In Panama, Jose Raul Molino, a last-minute standing candidate, was declared the winner of Sunday's presidential election. Molino, Panama's former public security minister, was originally a vice presidential candidate and was only officially announced as a presidential candidate 2 days before voting after his running mate, the former president Ricardo Martinelli, was disqualified due to a money laundering conviction. Martinelli, whose presidency ended a decade ago, has been taking refuge in the Nicaraguan embassy since February due to his legal issues. He remains popular in his vow to revive Panama's economy, take on drug cartels, and crack down on migration through Panama, including shutting down the treacherous Darien Gap. In southern Brazil, at least 78 people have died from major flooding after days of torrential downpours. Over 100 are still missing and tens of thousands have been displaced in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, where a hydroelectric dam collapsed and the lake broke its bank. This is a flood survivor who works at a local health center.
Everything's lost. There's nothing complete. I've been working here in this health unit for 23 years.
Here in the U.S., much of the Houston area remains submerged after a week of heavy rains. One 5-year-old child was killed when the vehicle he was riding in was swept away by fast-moving water. In other news from Texas, Democratic Congressmember Henry Cuellar and his wife were indicted on federal bribery and conspiracy charges. They're accused of accepting nearly $600,000 in bribes from an Azerbaijani oil and gas company and a bank in Mexico. Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial is entering its third week of testimony. On Friday, Trump's former top aide, Hope Hicks, described efforts to do damage control in the weeks prior to the 2016 election following the release of the infamous Access Hollywood tape where Trump openly bragged about assaulting women. On Thursday, prosecutors played jurors a secret audio tape of Trump and his then fixer, Michael Cohen, discussing a plan to pay off former Playboy model Karen McDougal to keep her silent about her affair with Trump. Police in Canada have arrested 3 Indian men suspected of assassinating the Canadian Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar outside a Sikh temple in British Columbia last year. Nijjar was a prominent leader in a movement to form an independent Sikh homeland in India. Last week, the Washington Post revealed senior members of India's spy agency were directly involved in a foil plot to kill a prominent Sikh activist who lives here in New York City. And the acclaimed British Palestinian surgeon, Hassan Abu Sita, was denied entry to France on Saturday, despite an invitation to speak to members of the French Senate about his time volunteering with Doctors Without Borders in Gaza. This comes weeks after Germany barred Abu Sita from attending a Palestinian conference in Berlin. Germany's reportedly placed a 1-year ban on Abu Sita from entering any country in Europe's border-free zone. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.
Navaz and Jeff Bennett are away. On the NewsHour tonight, Hamas and Israel trade ceasefire claims as Israel launches a targeted operation in parts of Rafah and demands tens of thousands leave the crowded city. Then, new witnesses in Donald Trump's hush money trial in New York detail the payments at the very heart of the case. And basketball star Brittany Griner opens up about her arrest and imprisonment in Russia.
It was really hard not being able to play, not knowing what was to come, if I would ever pick up the basketball professionally again. It was devastating to me to think about.
Like you. Thank you.
It is a delicate and momentous moment in the Middle East. The Israeli military tonight says it has launched a new operation into parts of Rafah in southern Gaza. At the same time, the Israeli government says it's continuing negotiations to reach a ceasefire in its war on Hamas in exchange for the release of Israeli hostages. It has been a day with fast-moving, competing headlines, and thankfully Nick Schifrin is here to break it all down for us. So Nick, what is the latest on the hostage negotiations? David Miller of the Carnegie Endowment, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Stephanie Tsai with NewsHour West. Here are the latest headlines. Russia announced drills to simulate the use of battlefield nuclear weapons in its war with Ukraine. It followed French talk of sending its own troops to Ukraine and the UK's approval of Ukraine's use of its weapons to strike inside Russia. A Kremlin statement on the war game said, "We hope that this event will cool down the hotheads in Western capitals." But in Paris, European Union leader Ursula von der Leyen met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and French President Emmanuel Macron and said she hopes China will intervene.
President Xi has played an important role in de-escalating Russia's irresponsible nuclear threats, and I'm confident that President Xi will continue to do so against the backdrop of the ongoing nuclear threats by Russia.
The U.S. Army confirms tonight that an American soldier has been arrested in the Russian Far East, where he was visiting his girlfriend. Officials say Staff Sergeant Gordon Black was supposed to be headed home from deployment in South Korea, but was detained Thursday in Vladivostok after being accused of stealing from the girlfriend. Authorities in southern Brazil now say at least 85 people have died following days of heavy rains and flooding, with more than 100 people still missing. The downpours hit the state of Rio Grande do Sul, triggering landslides, road closures, and widespread power blackouts. Entire neighborhoods in the city of Canoas are underwater, with many houses almost completely submerged. Some people have resorted to driving power boats through the streets. Back in this country, heavy rain across southeastern Texas began to taper off, but catastrophic flooding left widespread disruption and closed some schools. People in Harris County around Houston have begun surveying damage and cleaning up. Officials today said they've been fortunate to escape with no fatalities.
That happens, of course, because of our first responders, but also because of the individuals in the community who heeded our warnings and who took responsible steps in evacuating themselves and their families.
At least 3 people have died across Texas, including a 4-year-old boy who was in a car swept away by floodwaters. The launch of Boeing's first manned space flight was scrubbed late today, just hours before liftoff. The Starliner was to head to the International Space Station. A valve problem is to blame. The craft is set to lift off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 2 astronauts on board. They're supposed to return to Earth after a week. The launch could now happen on Tuesday. Meanwhile, the FAA has opened an investigation into production of Boeing 787 Dreamliner. The agency is probing whether Boeing skipped required electrical safety inspections where the wings join the fuselage in certain 787s and whether company employees may have falsified records. Boeing is reinspecting all Dreamliners still in production and will create a plan to inspect the planes currently in service. The Pulitzer Prizes for 2023 have been announced. They include the Public Service Award to ProPublica for reporting on billionaires giving gifts and travel to U.S. Supreme Court justices. The Associated Press won the Feature Photography Prize. Its work chronicled migrants traveling from as far as Colombia to the U.S. southern border. The prize for fiction went to Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips, a novel set in West Virginia after the Civil War. Still to come on the News Hour, as more colleges cancel graduation ceremonies, a look at how universities are handling campus protests. A new study finds hormone replacement therapy is safe and effective. And Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest political headlines.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WET. This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
On the stand today in New York City were 2 former employees of the Trump Organization. They were involved in the payments that are at the very center of the charges filed against the former president in his hush money trial. Jeffrey McConney and Deborah Tarasoff helped reimburse Mr. Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, for the payments Cohen made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the final days of the 2016 campaign. The former president also received another fine and a tough warning from the judge in this case, who again said if Trump continues to violate the court's gag order, he could face jail time. Jimena Bustillo is covering this trial for NPR, and she joins us now. Jimena, so nice to see you again. And join us again here tomorrow night for a look at the debate surrounding language and free speech on college campuses driven by the protests against the war in Gaza. That is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you so much.
This is Asia First.
It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore. Good morning. I'm Julie Yu. Our top story this hour. The EU and French pressed China on geopolitics and trade issues at a summit in Paris. The red carpet was rolled out for President Xi Jinping, but tough conversations were had on several thorny issues.
I'm Arnold Gay. Also this morning, Israel strikes Rafah, escalating tensions in the Middle East, despite Hamas approving a ceasefire proposal put forward by Qatari and Egyptian mediators. The proposed deal is reportedly far from Israel's necessary demands, as the U.S. says it's reviewing negotiations.
We are at a critical stage right now. We got a response from Hamas. Now, Director Burns is working through that, trying to assess it, working with the Israelis. I mean, my goodness, folks, I don't know that it gets any more sensitive than right now.
India heading to the polls again for the third phase of its general election. More than 90 constituencies across 11 states and union territories up for grabs.
I'm Elizabeth Neal with your business news. Stocks in Asia extending Wall Street's gains as slowing job growth fuels a fresh bounce of optimism that the Federal Reserve may cut rates this year. Plus, Boeing hit with a fresh probe from the U.S. air safety regulators. The Federal Aviation Administration is looking into whether the plane maker's employees failed to perform some quality inspections on its 787 jets. The trade tensions in the spotlight as Chinese President Xi Jinping concludes the Paris leg of his trip to Europe, the first in 5 years.
French President Emmanuel Macron and EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen met Mr. Xi with the 2 European leaders pushing for protection from an influx of cheap Chinese imports. Ross Cullen has more on the issues discussed during that meeting.
Xi Jinping was accorded a state visit just a little over a year after Emmanuel Macron's trip to China. Trilateral talks took place on Monday between Xi Jinping, Emmanuel Macron, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Brussels and Beijing have been at odds over trade, with issues surrounding reciprocity, equal market access, and what Ms von der Leyen has described as state-induced overcapacity. The French leader says Europe's market is strong, open, and independent.
La politique commerciale, économique, technologique n'est dictée par personne. Nous la souhaitons souveraine, c'est-à-dire indépendante. Et nous la souhaitons ouverte, confiante, mais nous voulons être en capacité de protéger nos intérêts.
Emmanuel Macron and Xi Jinping inspected troops just outside the tomb of France's 19th century military leader Napoleon, and President Xi broached the subject of modern conflict, saying the world is currently far from peaceful. He refused to condemn Russia over Ukraine. China says what is happening is a crisis and not a war.
Comme l'histoire n'a cessé de le démontrer, les conflits ne peuvent être réglés que par les négociations. Nous appelons les parties concernées à reprendre le contact et le dialogue pour accumuler progressivement la confiance mutuelle.
The visit formed part of ongoing celebrations to mark 60 years of diplomatic relations between Paris and Beijing. On Tuesday, there'll be a little less politics and more of a personal touch. Emmanuel Macron has invited Xi Jinping down to the southern Pyrenees Mountains, where his maternal grandmother was from, someone to whom he was very close and who had a big influence on Mr. Macron when he was growing up. Ross Cullen, CNA, Paris.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping also said that he supports French counterpart Emmanuel Macron's call for global truce during the Olympics in Paris this summer.
作为联合国安理会常任理事国和负责任大国，中国愿同法方一道，以巴黎奥运会为契机，倡议运动会期间全球停火止战。
For China's perspective on President Xi's visit to France, let's cross to Olivia Xiong in Beijing right now. Olivia, good morning. Trade, obviously at the forefront of the summit. How has President Xi navigated this thorny issue in talks with President Macron and also the Commission Chief, Ursula von der Leyen?
Arnold, amid the pomp and pageantry and the flurry of diplomatic activity that's happening, President Xi was quite clear on what China's message was. He called for China and France to jointly prevent a new Cold War or bloc confrontation, also calling on both sides to pursue win-win cooperation. Now, we know that President Xi is on a charm offensive in a toast at the welcome banquet that was held by the French president. He tried to use history, 60 years of diplomatic ties, to talk about why both countries should continue to work well together, calling China and France special friends, special in that both are committed to independence. Now, this word independence has come up quite a lot, as China has called on Europe to pursue its own policy on China, as it's concerned that it's become increasingly aligned with the US, and as it views Washington's actions as trying to contain China's development. Also amid those EU investigations into allegations of overcapacity, particularly with Chinese electric vehicles, which the French president supports. But we saw President Xi telling his French counterpart that China and France should jointly oppose decoupling and cutting off supply chains or erecting walls and barriers. And President Xi also trying to bring incentives. We're seeing reports that a slew of agreements, 18 of them, were signed in areas including artificial intelligence and clean energy, emphasizing also that China has fully opened its manufacturing sector. President Xi pledging that it will move faster to expand market access in the service sector like telecommunication and medical services. Now, we have to also remember that President Xi is catering to a domestic audience here. Coverage of his trip to Europe has been happening live and been brought blow by blow as the meetings have taken place, as we know that President Xi also wants to be able to portray himself as being a world leader that's able to handle China's relations with major countries as well.
And Olivia, war in Ukraine was also on the agenda. We know that Europe is concerned that while officially neutral over the Ukraine conflict, China is essentially backing Russia. So does the outlook look positive that something concrete can happen, given that President Putin is reportedly due to visit Beijing later this month?
Well, Julie, that's a difficult question, but what is clear from the statements that we have been seeing, especially from Chinese state media, is that there's been no change on China's position on Ukraine and on Russia. We see President Xi in his remarks that have been reported, repeating familiar lines that China has used, that China is not a party to the Ukraine crisis, but has maintained that it has played an important role for peace, adding that its special representative is on his third round of shuttle diplomacy, and in particular, President Xi hitting out at what he says are attempts to make China the scapegoat, and calling instead for negotiation and a peace conference. Now, China has repeatedly denied those allegations that it's funding Russia's industrial base, defense industrial base, or that it's providing those dual-use weapons to Russia. Again, through the prism of the U.S.-China relationship, in which we saw the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, when he was visiting Beijing, say that China cannot expect to have better relations with Europe if it does not address Russia's actions in Ukraine. Instead, China, though, has often hit back at the U.S. and the West, saying that they are the ones that are fanning the flames of tension in that part of the world. Now, we're also looking out for that upcoming visit by the Russian president to Beijing. China has not confirmed it or provided any further details, but we do know that China, in the face of these allegations, besides denying it, has also defended its relationship with Moscow, saying that its trade relations are normal. Julie.
Well, Olivia, thank you so much. Olivia Xiong, live there from Beijing. Well, Jeremy Chan from the Eurasia Group says President Xi's positive approach to the EU could be a strategic power play in the face of the bloc's trade moves against China.
I think the tone's been broadly positive, which is in line with what we were expecting. She's on the charm offensive, broadly speaking, with not only France, with the president of the EU Commission, von der Leyen, as well as obviously his upcoming trips to Serbia and Hungary. She was overdue for a visit to Europe. He hasn't been there in 5 years, and he hasn't been to France, obviously, in 5 years either. And he goes every 5 years, and he went in 2014, 2019, he'll go again in 2029. This is also reciprocating Macron's visit to China last year, in which they were discussing a lot of these sort of similar issues, dancing around trade, dancing around support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, etc. What she's broadly trying to do is to divide the EU over its ongoing investigation into state subsidies for Chinese EVs, partly by offering the carrot of greater market access for French firms in return for potentially lower or no tariffs on Chinese EVs, wind turbines, and solar panels. And more fundamentally, she's also appealing to Macron's desire for strategic autonomy from Washington and weakening support in Paris and potentially Brussels for the broader sort of US-led de-risking agenda in the West.
Exactly 7 months into the war, the fate of Gaza's last refuge, Rafah, growing more uncertain, even as cautious progress is made on securing a ceasefire. Israel is stepping up attacks on Rafah after Hamas accepted a truce proposal with terms that the Israelis say are far from meeting their demands. It will send a delegation to negotiate, but also continue with the Rafah offensive. In Rafah, there were celebrations when people learned of Hamas's acceptance of a truce proposal.
انا مش قادره اوصف لك فرحتي انا مش قادره اوصف لك فرحتي
صراحه انا ما صدقناش حسيت حالي فيلم يعني تقريبا فرحه مش طبيعيه كانت يعني مش عارف كيف اوصفها فرحه مش طبيعيه بس ان شاء الله بتتم على خير.
Over in Israel, protesters urged their government to agree to the deal and bring home the hostages, numbering about 130. They expressed disappointment at the government playing down the likelihood of a ceasefire.
And again, we see that the Israeli government is doing everything to fail the deal.
So what's in the proposal that Hamas has agreed to? Now, Hamas says it involves 3 stages, each lasting 42 days. And the first, it says, would entail return of civilian hostages and exchange of Palestinian prisoners. The second phase, according to Hamas, will include a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And the third would see the start of the implementation of reconstruction plan. Israel, however, has refused to end the war in Gaza till Hamas is dismantled. It continues to urge people in Rafah, a city of more than 1 million, to evacuate to make way for a ground offensive. Jordan is warning that bombing the city will risk jeopardizing any ceasefire deal. The UN says a mass evacuation is impossible to do safely.
Any escalation of hostilities resulting from a full-scale incursion into Rafah will push residents and displaced people currently living there past their breaking point.
With a potential deal hanging in the air, Simon Marks tells us if the US can put any kind of pressure on Israel to avoid jeopardizing progress made on negotiations.
Well, that's really the big question here, because we've been told time and again that President Biden has repeatedly made his position on the proposed Rafah offensive by the Israelis clear, that it is not to begin until humanitarian arrangements have been made for the enormous number of Palestinian civilians, up to 1 million people, who will be placed at risk. And yet the Biden administration was reportedly caught completely by surprise when the Israel Defense Forces started warning 100,000 Palestinians suddenly to evacuate parts of Rafah, and that led to fevered work behind the scenes to try and dissuade the Israelis, even as airstrikes were looming. At the White House, the president's national security spokesman John Kirby insisted the message to Israel had been clear, and there was no room for misunderstanding.
We've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. During his call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the president again made this clear. He also made clear that we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome, while securing the release of those hostages.
But where all this goes now is open to question, because with every passing day, America's ability to constrain Prime Minister Netanyahu appears to be challenged, and all eyes here are going to be on Rafah over the next few hours to see just how far the Israelis have decided to go.
It's business news next on Asia First with Liz Neo. So Japan's Nippon Steel clearing one hurdle in its bid to take over US Steel, but there's more.
Yes, so this green light comes from the European antitrust regulators, but the Japanese steelmaker is still facing resistance in the US. Of course, Boeing's latest turbulence, air safety regulators launched a new investigation into the company's 787 Dreamliner. I have the details for you next.
Just as past generations planned for and created.
All the facts and insights on recent world events.
That's World Roundup with me, Mark Owen, on France 24.
Israel rejects a ceasefire deal put forward by mediators in Egypt that has been accepted by Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu determined to push ahead with an offensive on Rafah, despite the US and others pleading for him not to. France calls on China to use its influence on Russia to help end the war in Ukraine as President Xi Jinping makes his grand return to the world stage, beginning a European tour here in Paris. And Vladimir Putin orders nuclear military exercises in response to Emmanuel Macron's comments on sending NATO troops to Ukraine. It's believed they will take place on Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. Welcome to the France 24 Newsroom, I'm Alexander Alcott. Now, Hamas has announced that it has accepted the terms of a Gaza ceasefire deal put to it by mediators from Egypt and Qatar. The US is now putting pressure on Israel to accept and halt the fighting and call off a ground offensive on Rafah. Benjamin Netanyahu's government, however, has said the deal doesn't meet Israel's core demands, and there are plans to push ahead with an assault on the southern city.
What seemed like a glimmer of hope around a deal many expected to fail, Hamas says it has accepted a ceasefire agreement with Israel, mediated by Qatar and Egypt, leading Palestinians in Gaza to erupt in celebration, only hours after the IDF had ordered them to evacuate the southern region of the enclave.
After Hamas agreed to the mediator's proposal for a ceasefire, the ball is now in the court of the Israeli occupation, whether it will agree to the ceasefire agreement or obstruct it.
But Benjamin Netanyahu says the deal which Hamas said it had accepted is far from Israel's demands, and the Israeli Prime Minister has approved an offensive in eastern Rafah.
Even though the Hamas proposal is far from Israel's necessary demands, Israel will send a working delegation to the mediators in order to exhaust the possibility of reaching an agreement under conditions acceptable to Israel.
The ceasefire deal was part of a 3-phase plan to temporarily put down arms and exchange Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, then to return the bodies of dead Israelis in Gaza. But Hamas reportedly didn't want to budge from its demand for a deal to end the war and IDF occupation. The US, Egypt and Qatar appeared to scramble to salvage a deal they had been pushing for over the past week. Egypt said it was in touch with all sides on Monday to prevent the situation from getting out of control.
And along with the outside pressure to accept the ceasefire deal, the Israeli government is also facing calls from within, as thousands of people earlier rallied in Tel Aviv pushing for an immediate deal to secure the release of hostages held in the Gaza Strip.
Frustration on the streets of Tel Aviv as the Israeli government says no to a ceasefire proposal. Families of hostages determined to ramp up pressure on the government, join protests calling for more to be done to release their loved ones.
We're here to get our government. They won't stop until they will bring everybody home now. They need to bring them home in a deal and end all the suffering and agony.
The uproar comes after Hamas gave the green light to the deal mediated by Egypt and Qatar. The offer would see a truce take place in multiple stages, starting with the release of some of the hostages and partial Israeli troop pullbacks within Gaza. Israel says the terms are far from its core demands and has long insisted that it will not remove boots from the ground as it continues to hunt down Hamas militants. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now set to send a negotiating team to Egypt to discuss an agreement.
We examine every response very seriously, and we review every possibility on the issue of negotiations and the return of the hostages to their homes as quickly as possible as a central task.
The Israeli military says it will continue its ground invasion of Rafah, thought to be Hamas's last stronghold in Gaza. Earlier, the city was the scene of celebrations over the news of a potential ceasefire deal. Now with no pact in sight, the excitement seems premature. Israel is warning 100,000 Palestinians to evacuate eastern neighborhoods in Rafah. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the looming invasion would be intolerable for some 1.4 million Palestinians taking refuge in the city.
And meanwhile, the pro-Palestinian protests in the US are showing no signs of slowing down, despite a police crackdown on the sit-ins. Students at MIT, for example, protesting the top university's ties with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, broke through fencing on Monday, linking arms around the remaining tents that are still there. Meanwhile, at New York's Columbia University, where the nationwide movement first began, really, the commencement ceremony has been scrapped due to the weeks of demos. Moving on now to other world news, the French president has rolled out the red carpet for his visiting Chinese counterpart during a two-day state visit that kicks off the European tour of Xi Jinping. Emmanuel Macron has hailed China's return to the world stage, with President Xi having been largely absent since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic 5 years ago now. Jenny Shin talks us through some of the difficult issues the leaders have had to discuss.
It's the first stop on Xi Jinping's Europe trip, seeking to rebuild relations at a time of Beijing's tensions with the bloc. The hot topic of the summit, security and the war in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron and EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen pressed Xi to use China's influence to steer Russia towards de-escalation and an eventual halt to its invasion. This just hours after President Vladimir Putin ordered nuclear weapons drills in response to what he called threats from the West.
We respect the ancient ties that unite China and Russia, as well as the efforts that have been made over decades to stabilize this relationship. In view of this complex history, we welcome China's commitment to refraining from selling any arms or providing any aid to Moscow, and to strictly controlling the export of dual-use goods.
President Xi reaffirmed China's willingness to play a mediator role, saying it hopes the warring sides can resume dialogue.
We call on the parties concerned to resume contact and dialogue in order to gradually build mutual trust. We support the organization of an international peace conference at the right time, one that is recognized by Russia and Ukraine.
Another top priority in the talks, the EU's trade deficit with China, which stood at 291 billion euros last year. Pressuring Xi to accept fair global trade rules, von der Leyen said the bloc would not back down from taking tough measures to protect its economy. Some member countries refused tit-for-tat measures, as China is a key economic partner. Among them are Serbia and Hungary, the two other countries President Xi is due to visit after France.
Vladimir Putin has ordered nuclear military exercises in Russia in response to Emmanuel Macron's comments on the possibility of sending NATO troops to Ukraine. Place and date of the exercises are yet to be announced, but it's thought they will likely take place on Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia.
Announced on the Russian Defense Ministry's Telegram feed, the Kremlin says it has begun preparations for drills for the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, involving the Air Force, Navy and Army present on Ukrainian territories, occupied by Moscow. Training in response to comments made by Western leaders, notably Emmanuel Macron.
They talked about the will and even the intention to send armed contingents to Ukraine, which means to place NATO soldiers against the Russian army. This is a whole new level of escalation. It's unprecedented.
Last week in the British newspaper The Economist, the French president reiterated his openness to sending troops to Ukraine.
If the Russians were to go and break through the front lines, if there were a Ukrainian request, which is not the case today, we should legitimately ask ourselves the question.
An idea he had already expressed in February, which was dismissed by many of his European counterparts. But today, some countries like the UK are changing their tune. According to the British Foreign Minister David Cameron, missiles supplied to Ukraine by London could be used to strike Russian territory. Another escalation that has angered Moscow.
This Monday marked exactly 50 years since ABBA first burst onto the world stage by winning the Eurovision Song Contest. The competition begins this week in the supergroup's native Sweden. Once again, while many are excited for the annual night of Camp Pop, which is strictly apolitical, the Gaza war has nonetheless cast a shadow over proceedings.
For many, Eurovision is a time to celebrate, a quirky competition bringing together European nations, with some friends from outside the continent too. But for the second year in a row, this edition is marred by the effects of war. Police in Malmö said they are prepared for the week-long contest, but expect critics of Israel's Gaza offensive to protest at the event.
We're expecting some demonstrations, of course, and voicing of opinions, and the right to demonstrate is highly protected in the Swedish constitution, so it's been a part of our planning work since the beginning, so we feel prepared to handle any demonstrations that are going in Malmö.
Thousands are expected to demonstrate, and some prominent Swedish artists have withdrawn from taking part in the event, some arguing that Israel's contestant Eden Galan shouldn't be allowed to participate. As a precaution for the demonstrations, prisoners have been transported to different detention centres to clear jail cells for the case of a surge in arrests, and neighbouring Denmark and Norway have pledged police reinforcements. Sweden's third largest city, Malmö has a large Muslim community, mainly from Iraq and Syria, and the country's biggest Palestinian population.
I'm going to take a brief look at southern Brazil, where almost 130,000 people remain homeless following floods and mudslides. Already 83 people are known to have died as a result of the unprecedented deluge in Rio Grande do Sul state. Hopes of fading also for the 111 reported missing. The governor says the disaster has left the state resembling a scene of war, and experts link the scale of destruction to climate change. Now, the judge overseeing the hush money hearing of Donald Trump in New York has threatened the presidential hopeful with jail time after he violated a gag order 10 times since last week, paying $1,000 fine each of those times. The judge said this clearly wasn't enough of a deterrent, however, and said the time in prison must be considered, though he stressed this would only be a last resort.
Donald Trump has accomplished many firsts during his public life. Now you can add being the first former president directly threatened with jail time at his criminal trial. At issue, the former president's continued violation of a gag order, which he railed against again Monday morning just outside the courtroom.
The judge is totally conflicted. It's totally conflicted, and you want to take a look at it. And I'm not supposed to be talking about it. But I am allowed to say that the judge has a conflict that like nobody's ever had before. You want to take a look at it.
This is the second time Judge Juan Merchan has found Trump in contempt for violating the order, which bars the former president from speaking out publicly about witnesses, jurors, court staff, and their families. With the fines of $1,000 per violation having no apparent effect, in court the judge addressed Trump directly, saying, "This court will have to consider a jail sanction. At the end of the day, I have a job to do. Part of that job is to protect the dignity of the justice system." The judge adding, "The last thing I want to do is put you in jail. You are the former president of the United States, and possibly the next president as well." Trump, who had no visible reaction to the threat of jail, is charged with 34 felonies of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment of $130,000 to the porn star Stormy Daniels in the run-up to the 2016 election. Prosecutors allege the payment made by his attorney and fixer Michael Cohen was part of a conspiracy to help Trump cover up negative stories about him amounting to election interference. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denies he ever had an affair with Stormy Daniels. He faces possible prison time if convicted.
Staying in the US, the French basketball star Victor Wembanyama has lived up to all the hype during his first year in the NBA. He's been duly named Rookie of the Year. San Antonio Spurs player who entered as the first draft pick was unanimously chosen as the #1 by all 99 reporters who were casting their votes. Putting his staggering proportions to good use, he's ended his rookie season on 1,500 points, in excess of that, with more than 250 assists and over 250 blocked shots. And finally, the first crewed flight of Boeing's Starliner spaceship has had to be postponed at the last minute as a safety issue was detected shortly before launch. The astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were already strapped into their seats when they had to recall that the takeoff was aborted. This was seen as a crucial step for Boeing, which is hoping to take on Elon Musk's SpaceX for a lucrative NASA contract, and it comes at an awful time as the commercial jet sector is in crisis at Boeing following a series of aviation accidents. That's where we end this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.
Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Wei. Coming up in the...
And your family. Budget night next Tuesday on ABC and ABC iView.
Today, airstrikes hit Rafah. Israel pushes on with its Gaza offensive despite Hamas agreeing to a ceasefire proposal. Accused killer Erin Patterson pleads not guilty over the alleged mushroom murders. An Australian pilot forced to take evasive action after a Chinese military jet fires flares close to a Navy helicopter. And all the glitz and glamour from the Met Gala, we take a look at the stars gracing this year's green carpet. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Roz Childs. Hamas has agreed to a Gaza ceasefire proposal put forward by Egypt and Qatar, but Israel has indicated a deal is still a long way off. Gazans celebrated the news of Hamas's acceptance outside Al-Aqsa Hospital in the besieged enclave, but the celebrations were premature, with Israel's cabinet unanimously voting to continue the country's offensive in the southern city of Rafah. Israel says the current proposal, which would begin with a 6-week ceasefire and the release of 33 Israeli hostages, is far from reaching its core demands, but it will continue to engage with negotiations. The IDF has since carried out airstrikes in Rafah, where about half of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been taking refuge. It's ordered more than 100,000 people to evacuate the city, sparking fears of a full-blown assault. Australian Prime Minister has expressed his concern about Israel's mobilisation of troops.
We've said very clearly, the Foreign Minister has said that we do not support the intervention into Rafah, that we're concerned about the humanitarian impact. Palestinians were told to move south in Gaza towards Rafah. The concern which is there is for a loss of innocent life. We want there to be a sustainable ceasefire. We want the hostages should be released immediately and unconditionally. That should occur.
Well, Global Affairs editor John Lyons is with me in the studio. Hi, John. So where are we with this proposed ceasefire?
Well, Roz, at the moment, the key figure in this is Bill Burns, the CIA director, who's shuttling between Cairo and Israel, talking to President Biden. The President Biden has been speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. The Egyptians and Qataris have come forward with this proposal based on weeks and months of sitting in on negotiations. They thought that this was acceptable to both sides. Hamas said yes and has accepted it. Israel has said no. Now there is some commentary inside Israel in the influential newspaper Haaretz. which is actually arguing that Benjamin Netanyahu was deliberately sabotaging this peace deal, that he expected, or hoped that Hamas would reject it, because his view, whether he would deny he's sabotaging it, what he would argue is the job hasn't yet been done. Hamas has not yet been completely destroyed. That was evidenced by the fact 2 days ago that they fired a missile towards the Kerem Shalom crossing and killed 3 Israeli soldiers. So Hamas still has capability. Their leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, is still on the loose, has not been caught or killed. And so from Israel's point of view, or the government's point of view there, they believe the job's not finished yet.
So Israel says it's continuing its plans for a ground offensive in Rafah. When could that get underway, and how full an assault could that be?
Could be any time, Ros. What's happening now is there is movement of Israeli tanks, according to reliable reports, around to the south. The Israeli tanks appear to be taking up positions against the Rafah crossing in the south of Rafah. So it looks like the strategy is to ensure that any remaining Hamas fighters who are now taking refuge in Rafah, ready for the big battle for Rafah, that they cannot escape through that crossing in Rafah into Egypt. So it looks like Israel is sealing that off, and that would probably be a prelude for another operation. I don't think it'll be a major operation of thousands of troops. It looks like the indications suggest that it would be Israeli special operations going in and out in smaller groups of 10 or 15, looking for hostages and looking for Hamas commanders, particularly Yahya Sinwar.
So we've had these contradictory scenes coming out of Gaza. On the one hand, people celebrating news of this, that Hamas has accepted the terms of the ceasefire, yet at the same time, civilians being evacuated from Rafah.
Well, the time lag there, Ros, is that they're celebrating when they heard the news that Hamas had agreed to the ceasefire. The pictures we're seeing now indicates they thought that the war would be over if Hamas accepted it. And then a few hours later, the Israeli army put out a statement talking about warning people in the east of Rafah. They want 100,000 people or so who are in the eastern suburbs of Rafah to evacuate up towards the beach, towards the Al-Mawasi humanitarian area. And that's a grand description for essentially a lot of tents next to the beach.
Do you get any sense, John, that this could be the beginning of the end of this war, be it through the ceasefire or through military action?
Yes, clearly, you can feel that the momentum is coming towards an end, as you'd expect after 7 months. Gaza's largely been destroyed. It will take according to the UN, till 2040 to restore all the homes devastated. There's massive amounts of ordnance that have been dropped there, and there's poisons and there's unexploded mines. So that will begin as soon as the war finishes. But you get the sense that the US is putting more and more pressure on Israel to finish this thing.
John, thank you. And the United States is reviewing the terms of the proposal. It says it won't support Israel's ground offensive in Rafah until it's confident that civilians can be protected. Here's North America correspondent Jade McMillan, who's in Washington.
Things have been moving quickly ever since Hamas announced that it had accepted a ceasefire proposal. It said that it would be made up of 3 phases, each 6 weeks long, with Israeli troops withdrawing from Gaza as part of the second stage. The United States says that it is reviewing the terms of the ceasefire proposal. It's really limiting the amount of information that it is making public, only saying that the director of the CIA, William Burns, is in the region at the moment, that the Hamas response followed, talks that he had been involved in, and that he is now discussing the matter with partners in the region. The White House spokesman, John Kirby, was pushed for more detail, for more information. He argued that he didn't want to compromise the chances of an agreement actually being struck.
But I really do hope you understand that the last thing I would ever want to do from this podium is say something that could put this very sensitive process at greater risk. We are at a critical stage right now. We got a response from Hamas. Now Director Burns is working through that, trying to assess it, working with the Israelis. I mean, my goodness, folks, I don't know that it gets any more sensitive than right now. And the worst thing that we can do is start speculating about what's in it.
Now, the US is still hoping to avoid an all-out assault on Rafah. The President, Joe Biden, spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister earlier today. That call took place before Hamas's response was made public, so they didn't discuss the specifics of it. But we know that they did talk about the situation in Rafah. Joe Biden, according to the White House, reiterating his position that the US would not support a major ground offensive in that area without what the United States is calling a credible plan to protect civilians, a plan that it has said it is yet to see. The Australian government is among those who are urging Israel against going down that path. And a spokesman for the United Nations Secretary General has also released a statement expressing deep concern about what could yet unfold, and really calling on Hamas and Israel to, in his words, go the extra mile to reach an agreement and end the suffering.
Accused killer Erin Patterson has formally pleaded not guilty to murdering 3 people and has elected to have her case fast-tracked to a Victorian Supreme Court trial. She was charged of the alleged mushroom poisoning of 3 guests who ate a beef Wellington at her home last year. Court reporter Christian Silver has more from Melbourne. Hi, Christian. What happened in court today?
Good afternoon, Ros. Well, from a legal perspective, a pretty significant development in the sense that Erin Patterson formally entered not guilty pleas to 3 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. It's not a huge surprise given Erin Patterson had previously declared her innocence, but of course it's always good when a person formally puts it on the record in the courtroom. In terms of what happened in the room today, Erin Patterson was beamed into the courtroom via video link, and the magistrate actually went through each of the charges and asked her to formally declare her position, and to each of those she said, "Not guilty, Your Honour." In terms of the background to this story, I'm sure many people know it all centres on this lunch which happened at Erin Patterson's house in July last year. 4 guests attended. They were extended relatives of Erin Patterson's, and they ate beef Wellington which had mushrooms inside. Police allege that those mushrooms were poisonous. 3 of the relatives, Don and Gail Patterson, died along with Heather Wilkinson, and Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, was the sole survivor of the lunch. But really the key result from this hearing today is that the case will be fast-tracked, and it means that there'll be an outcome in this case quicker.
So when's the trial due to start?
Roz, that's a question we'd all love to know. What we do know is that this case will go to the Supreme Court for what's called a directions hearing on the 23rd of May, and that's when they'll start the timetabling process of figuring out when they can do this trial. Typically, when trials reach the Supreme Court, or when cases reach the Supreme Court, I should say, the trial takes about 6 to 18 months to organise. They have to go through things like formalising the witness list. The judge has to decide what evidence can be ruled in or out. But ultimately, what this all means is that a jury, likely to be 12 people, 12 Victorian community members, will have the final say on Erin Patterson's innocence or guilt in this case.
And Christian, you're also providing updates on this case on your podcast, Mushroom Case Daily.
We are, Rosa. The podcast Mushroom Case Daily, it follows all the events of this case in court. We want to bring people all the updates because we know there's just huge public interest in this case. It's garnered worldwide attention. So the podcast Mushroom Case Daily, it's on the ABC Listen app or wherever you find your podcast. You can search it up and hit follow, and then you'll get all the updates on this case.
Okay, Christian, thank you.
Thanks, Ross.
The Prime Minister says Australia has used diplomatic and defence channels to express deep concerns about a Chinese jet detonating flares near a Navy helicopter. Flares were dropped just hundreds of metres ahead of the Seahawk, which was operating in international waters off South Korea. For more defence correspondent Andrew Green joins us now. Hi, Andrew. So firstly, what happened and what's been the response?
Ros, this latest flare-up in the relationship between Australia and China occurred over the weekend. The Defence Department has released details of what occurred in the Yellow Sea off the coast of South Korea. HMAS Hobart, an Australian air warfare destroyer, is taking part in a UN mission to enforce sanctions against North Korea. A helicopter, a Seahawk, that flew off that warship was intercepted by the Chinese Air Force, and that J-10 aircraft then released flares that were in the flight path of the Australian Navy helicopter. The pilot had to take evasive action to avoid what could have been a catastrophic situation. The response from the Albanese government has been quite strident. The Defence Minister and his department have both described this as unsafe and unprofessional behaviour. Let's hear, though, from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Dialogue is important. It's always important to have avenues of communication. And that's why we've used all of those avenues of communication to make our position on this incident very clear.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese reacting to these events while in Queensland today. We also have heard from the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, who was, until the last election, the Defence Minister and dealing with similar incidents. The opposition leader says that the Prime Minister now needs to pick up the phone to the Chinese leader.
I think the Prime Minister has to pick the phone up and express our deep concern, because at the moment we'll see a response from China to deny that it happened or that we have made a mistake. We've seen this movie before, but it is at some stage going to escalate, perhaps by accident, but it'll be that unintended consequence, and Australian Defence Force personnel will pay with their lives, and we don't want to see that.
Andrew, this incident comes at a time of heightened military tensions in the region.
Certainly does. Last week, in fact, we saw the Defence Ministers of Australia, the United States, Japan and the Philippines all get together in Hawaii. There at that meeting they resolved to do more coordinated exercises and to give support to the Philippines, which is facing quite a lot of pressure off its west coast from Chinese vessels. Australia has also said that it wants to do more patrols off the South China Sea. And just in the past fortnight or so, we've seen the Australian Chief of Navy confront his Chinese counterpart directly over an incident that occurred last November where a sonar was deployed against Australian divers while they were in the water, also on a UN mission in international territory.
And finally, Andrew, the Army is today resuming parachute operations. This is following the fatal training accident involving a Special Forces soldier in March.
Yeah, some breaking news on this story. The Australian Army, through its Special Operations Command, has just confirmed that parachute training and operations will resume as early as this afternoon. They have been on hold for 2 months since that tragedy at the RAAF base Richmond in Sydney's west. The incident involved Lance Corporal Jack Fitzgibbon, the son of former Defence Minister Joel Fitzgibbon. Following that accident, Army announced an immediate pause on all parachute activity in the Defence Force, and there are now 4 separate investigations, including one by the New South Wales coroner, that are examining what occurred.
Andrew, thank you. The Treasurer has flagged possible changes for welfare recipients in the federal budget next week. The government has been urged to increase unemployment benefits to 90% of the aged pension, but says there are financial pressures to manage. Fiscal reporter Tom Lowry joins us now from Canberra. Tom, what sort of change is possible here?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ros. It'll probably be something more modest than what many advocates would like. The government, as you mentioned, has been urged by many for some time to lift the rate of unemployment benefits to 90% of the age pension. Among those is the government's own Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee, a body that was set up in a deal with the independent Senator David Pocock a couple of years ago. It delivers advice to the government ahead of every federal budget about the adequacy of its income supports. It came out this year and told the government its payments are, in its words, seriously inadequate. Now, that's despite the government giving some increases during the last federal budget in 2023, a $40 a fortnight lift to the job seeker rate and a 15% increase to rent assistance. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, was asked this morning about that suggestion that payments be lifted to 90% of the age pension rate. Does the government have even plans for perhaps a pathway to getting to that point? Here's what the Treasurer had to say.
There will be additional steps in this budget which are conscious of the recommendations that important, well-regarded, well-informed committee has put to us. You know, we take it seriously. We can't afford to do every recommendation put to us by that committee. In some cases, announcing future directions is warranted. In others, we need to be a bit more careful because we need to be cognizant of the budget situation and what we can afford. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver when it comes to our most vulnerable people.
Jim Chalmers there indicating something at least is being considered ahead of the budget on Tuesday night. We can only speculate, of course, as to what that might be. The government could tweak job seeker payments, it could lift rent assistance on its own, something more down the housing path. We'll have to wait until Tuesday night rolls to find out.
Okay, Tom, thank you. Overstretched, burnt out and leaving in droves. Child protection workers say high staff turnover rates are adding to the pressure of a system in crisis. More than 10% of caseworker positions across New South Wales are currently unfilled, and existing staff only getting around to seeing a fraction of the children reported as being at risk of harm. Emma Rennie has this report for Stateline.
Bettina Hoover was a child protection caseworker for more than 20 years. She resigned in February.
Seeing the children's pain and suffering on a day-to-day basis, it just got to the point where I just felt I couldn't do it anymore.
She says there are not enough staff to cope with the deluge of referrals, and thousands of at-risk children are being overlooked.
They're just not getting the support that they need, or they're just not being seen by caseworkers.
Last year, more than 100,000 children in New South Wales were considered at risk of significant harm. Less than a quarter of them were seen by a child protection caseworker. The problem is worse in regional areas. In northern New South Wales, only 15% of at-risk children were seen, the lowest rate in the state. More than 1 in 10 caseworker positions are vacant. Dedicated staff like Bettina have left, citing burnout and a lack of support.
I felt like I was hitting my head against the wall in the end, and it was hurting me, and I think a lot of caseworkers would feel similar.
We need to attract more caseworkers and retain the caseworkers in the system, and to do that we must make sure that they feel valued, because they have not felt valued for years. The union says an extra 500 caseworkers are needed.
Without that, I think people are going to continue to let go and walk away, which only means that those outcomes don't change for children.
Last week, it was revealed more than 400 at-risk children are being put up in hotels, motels and caravan parks, supervised by a rotating roster of agency staff.
If you can just imagine what it would be like for your 3 or 5-year-olds to be looked after by constantly changing adults with no relationship with.
The government says one solution is to recruit more foster carers, but it's struggling to retain the ones it already has.
I do know of families who have had to say goodbye to little ones because they were not supported enough.
A broken system that's failing the children it's meant to protect. Emma Rennie, ABC News.
Let's get finance news now with Alicia Barry. Hi, Alicia. So the Reserve is meeting today on interest rates. What's expected?
Well, Ros, the broad expectation is that the Reserve Bank will keep interest rates on hold at 4.35%. But after a hotter than expected inflation reading a couple of weeks ago, the expectations for where interest rates go next have shifted, with many economists pushing back their expectations as to when the RBA will cut, and even some economists putting rate hikes back on the agenda. The market is anticipating that we will see, or is betting that there's an 85% chance that the Reserve Bank will leave the cash rate on hold, with a 15% chance that we could see an interest rate hike. But when you look at the economy broadly, retail sales are in the doldrums. There is a segment of the community that is really struggling under the burden of high interest rates. Those are people who are younger and heavily indebted, whereas those who are perhaps older without the debt burden are still able to spend. And we're also seeing goods inflation come down much faster than services inflation, and anyone who's paying for education or childcare or insurance will know that those sort of prices are going up quite sharply. So look, the RBA has a pretty hard job. It's a blunt tool. I was speaking to their chief economist at Creditor Watch, Annika Thompson, earlier. She thinks that the cash rate is as high as it will go, but it's going to take some time to come down. She thinks the RBA won't start cutting rates until the end of this year or early next year, when the unemployment rate has risen, easing pressure on inflation.
I think they would like to see, as awful as it sounds, they would like to see the unemployment rate get probably at least into the 4% before they start, before they're confident that pressure on wages is gone, and that they'll be confident enough that inflation will keep moving down into the band even after they cut interest rates.
Let's get some corporate news now. Alicia, NZ's profit is out. What does it show?
Yeah, tough competition in the home lending sector has really eaten into margins at the home lender, and in fact that's been the case for all of the big banks. ANZ's first half results round out the results for the top 4 banks. It's reported a 7% fall in cash profit to $3.6 billion for the half year. Net interest income dropped by 1%, and the bank's net interest margin, that's the difference between the cost of lending money versus borrowing money, has fallen by 2 basis points, really driven by the impact of home lending competition and higher wholesale funding and deposit costs. It's declared an interim dividend of 83 cents a share, partially franked at 65%. And the group's also announced a $2 billion share buyback, but that hasn't been enough for investors, Ros. The stock has been pointing lower today.
How's the market doing, Alicia?
Well, it is on the way up, albeit modestly. We're seeing about a 0.5% gain or just under at the moment. There was quite a lot of optimism on Wall Street overnight, and of course now investors are on edge ahead of the RBA's rates decision. The All Ords and the ASX 200 index are up, as I said, around 0.5%. You can see there 35 points for the All Ords, 30 points for the ASX 200 index. There are some standouts when it comes to the top movers. Energy giant AGL has upgraded its earnings guidance for the financial year, citing consumer demand during the summer. We're also seeing Paladin Energy, the uranium producer, up sharply, and the buy now pay later company Block doing well. On the way down, Sims, Babcock and GrainCorp. Over to the Asian session, where it is mixed. The Nikkei Japan performing fairly strongly, the NZ50 reversing earlier gains and down around 0.5% at the moment. It's mixed across those Chinese markets. And on to Wall Street, where there was a rally overnight on hopes the US Federal Reserve may be able to cut interest rates later in the year. The Dow Jones was up 0.5%. Investors like the prospect of lower interest rates, so the S&P was 1% stronger and the Nasdaq up 1.1%. On commodity markets, spot gold prices are giving back some recent gains, albeit just modestly. Crude oil prices are a little stronger, and the Australian dollar, of course, will be in focus when the RBA releases its rates decision in around 2 hours' time. It's currently sitting a little weaker against the greenback, but still well above 66 US cents. Thanks, Alicia.
The Victorian government says families grappling with the rising cost of living are set to be among the big winners from this year's state budget. Reporter Stephanie Ferrier is at Parliament House in Melbourne. This is Premier Jacinta Allen's first budget as a leader and Treasurer Tim Pallas's 10th, and they're promising a disciplined and sensible budget that focuses on struggling families. A centrepiece is a $400 one-off school saving bonus that will be available for around 700,000 students at all government schools, like the one behind me, and also eligible concession card holders at other schools. It's expected to cost a total of $287 million, and parents will be able to use this payment for education-related expenses, things like school camps, excursions, textbooks and uniforms. But they won't be able to spend it straight away. This will be rolled out in Term 4 for redemption in Term 1, and it will be cashless, with this payment credited to a family's account at the child's school. In other areas of the budget, expect it to be tight. Victoria's big build is expected to be put on go slow, and other government departments like health services are already being told to cut staff and programs to help rein in spending and reduce the rising debt that's expected to increase to $178 billion in 2 years. Stephanie Ferrier there. Evidence is mounting that a medication already used to treat opioid and alcohol dependence could benefit people living with long COVID. Queensland researchers have published world-first findings showing naltrexone restores the function of impaired cells from patients with a debilitating condition.
Jaden Donald grew up outdoors, his love of horse riding taking him to national dressage competitions. But this time last year, he was floored by long COVID.
It was that fight walking, you couldn't do anything, animals, horses, kind of went from, being outside 24/7 to being locked in the house.
After contracting the virus for the second time, the 19-year-old engineering student didn't recover. He could barely leave the house, had low blood pressure, a high heart rate and brain fog.
Wasn't good.
Jaden started seeing a physiotherapist and a doctor prescribed a low dose of naltrexone, a medication used to block the effects of opioids and alcohol. The symptoms slowly diminished and his energy returned.
Probably around 70%.
Other people with long COVID have anecdotally reported benefits from naltrexone, and now Queensland scientists are working to verify it. They've published a study showing the drug restored the function of impaired immune cells from long COVID patients.
We're the first to actually find the cell mechanism of how this drug may be benefiting patients.
Put simply, naltrexone repaired the ion channels, or closed off doorways into the damaged cells, enabling calcium to enter.
The calcium inside the cells make the cells work properly.
The researchers will now run 2 clinical trials testing low-dose naltrexone in patients with long COVID and myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, 2 conditions causing much suffering around the world. Professor Fred Meunier wasn't involved in the study and says while it's an important step, the clinical trial results will be crucial.
We need to know that a long COVID patient gets better.
Jaden is now back in the saddle. Emma Pollard, ABC News, Brisbane.
Quick look at the national weather now. Brisbane and Sydney showers, mostly cloudy in Canberra and Hobart. Melbourne mostly sunny. Perth, Adelaide and Darwin, a sunny day.
Tonight, breaking news, a new warning just as we come on the air tonight with the National Weather Service is now warning is a particularly dangerous situation. Their highest threat level for tornadoes and severe storms. Several states, Ginger C is live in the storm zone. The threat of multiple intense long-track tornadoes on the ground for much longer. Tornadoes could be at least EF3s in strength and potentially hitting in the overnight hours. We're also tracking major flooding, the emergency, first responders, and hundreds of water rescues. Also breaking as we come on tonight, Israel now launching dozens of airstrikes on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The Israeli war cabinet approving plans to launch a ground attack. It all comes just as Hamas now says it has agreed to a potential ceasefire, though different terms from what was offered in recent days. So what both sides are now saying at this hour. Here at home tonight, the protests on college campuses over the war tonight. Columbia now canceling its main commencement ceremony, and more than 100 arrested in California. Tonight, the news coming in, an American soldier has now been detained in Russia. Martha Raddatz standing by with late reporting. Tonight, the drama in court, President Trump's criminal trial, the judge telling Trump the fines against him are not working. Telling the former president jail is now a possibility. The judge telling Trump, at the end of the day, I have a job to do. Tonight, the heart-stopping moments inside a Pennsylvania church. A suspect pointing a handgun right at the pastor, what then plays out. The ABC News exclusive tonight, Lindsay Davis interviewing the prosecutor who is now off the Georgia case against Donald Trump. Lindsay asking Nathan Wade, did you jeopardize the case by having that relationship with DA Fani Willis? What he says tonight about what Trump will face in this case, regardless of whether Wade is one of the prosecutors. Tonight, the recalls, 2 different kinds of Planters nuts recalled, and we'll tell you why. We also have news on Alzheimer's tonight, 2 copies of the same gene seen in many Alzheimer's patients and what scientists now say this could reveal. And tonight, the countdown at this hour, Boeing's critical mission tonight. Starliner set to blast off the first time with 2 NASA astronauts on board.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening. We begin tonight with this new warning from the National Weather Service calling us a, quote, particularly dangerous situation unfolding just as we come on tonight. Their highest warning for intense long-track tornadoes, possibly EF3s or higher, and on the ground for many miles. Kansas and Oklahoma in the bullseye. Tornado watches, in fact, across multiple states. The violent line of storm stretching from Oklahoma City to western Iowa, and then the severe weather moving east right into the Ohio Valley. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z. She's leading us off at El Reno, Oklahoma, of course, potentially in the path of all of this. Ginger, take us through it.
Yes, David, I am right in the middle of that particularly dangerous situation, tornado watch, and the darkness behind me is actually one of the tornado-warned storms, about 65 miles to our northwest. We're going to watch this line and be one of many cities tonight that has to watch for those intense and long-track tornadoes that you mentioned. Wichita Falls, Norman, Oklahoma, Wichita, Kansas, up to Salina, all included. And it's just starting now. We're really going to see this low-level jet punch, and everything's forming on what we call the dry line. But you see the severe storms all the way back to eastern Montana, parts of North Dakota, Iowa going to be in part play tonight, Missouri, including Kansas City, but it happens after that sun goes down. Watch the timing as we track this east, western Iowa, down through Kansas City. It's about midnight, and then into northeastern Oklahoma, so even Tulsa gets delayed 10, 11 p.m. Then you look after midnight till 5 a.m., and that's when you go to eastern Iowa, much of Missouri, including St. Louis, early morning hours into Arkansas. So, David, tomorrow we also have a threat, enhanced risk that includes parts of Ohio. Columbus is in there too.
Very dangerous night ahead in Ginger. You and I have talked often about when this hits in the middle of the night, so please heed the warnings, everyone in Ginger. You and the team stay safe. We'll be watching first thing in the morning on GMA. We're also tracking at this hour the flooding emergency playing out, and it's turned deadly now. Houston with 2 feet of rain in just a matter of days. Thousands forced to evacuate. Homes and neighborhoods tonight underwater. First responders making hundreds of high water rescues. A Houston police officer on a jet ski rescuing a man and his 2 dogs who were treading water outside their flooded home. And tonight, Texas now reporting the storms have taken 3 lives, including a 4-year-old boy when the family car was swept away. ABC's Mola in Texas tonight.
Tonight, the National Weather Service issuing their highest warning, a particularly dangerous situation for large, long-track tornadoes for parts of Texas, Kansas, and most of Oklahoma. Our Oklahoma City affiliate, KOCO, tracking supercells.
Pay close attention to this storm. Listen to our language very closely, listen to our tone, and be ready to seek shelter if a tornado warning does come out on this.
It's the 4th tornado outbreak in 4 weeks, with many of the same areas under threat. While millions in the heartland brace for tornadoes, neighborhoods north of Houston still flooded after days of rain.
Well, this neighborhood is almost completely underwater. Best case scenario, you've got a house on stilts that's undamaged, but even then, the ground floor property, cars are flooded out. Worst case scenario, you've got homes not on stilts, totally flooded out.
Timothy Boudreau and his wife using a jet ski and a tin boat to deliver essentials to stranded families in Riverside, Texas.
Well, I was actually the UPS guy here for 15 years.
Now you're making different kind of deliveries.
Yeah.
Well, David, floodwaters receding dramatically tonight, revealing the damage. This family's home getting swept away, about 100 yards away here, landing here finally. David, as you can imagine, a lot of cleanup ahead of these folks tonight.
That is really extraordinary to see. Mola, thank you. There's also breaking news involving Israel and Hamas tonight. Israel now launching dozens of airstrikes on the southern Gaza city of Rafah, and the Israeli war cabinet approving plans to launch a ground attack now. This all comes after Hamas today says it had agreed to a potential ceasefire, though what Hamas agreed to was different from what was offered by Israel in recent days. So will this ceasefire proposal go anywhere? ABC's Marcus Moore in Tel Aviv tonight.
Israel launching dozens of airstrikes tonight and approving plans for a ground attack on the southern Gazan city of Rafah, just hours after Hamas announced new terms of a ceasefire proposal that they're willing to accept. It is not the same deal that was on the table last week. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the proposal Hamas agreed to was, quote, far from Israel's core demands. A senior Israeli official saying Hamas agreed to a different deal than the one Israel had proposed, which included at least a 6-week ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for up to 33 hostages. But Hamas is still insisting on that permanent ceasefire. Our team inside Gaza. Hamas's announcement set off celebrations. This little girl smiling, giving the peace sign as the news spread. In Tel Aviv tonight, pressure on the government to accept that deal. Patience has been running thin among family members of those held hostage. They don't want this possible proposal to be a missed opportunity.
Don't mess it up, Mr. Prime Minister. Okay, don't mess it up this time. The hostages have no more time. No more time.
Overnight, Israel warning 100,000 Palestinians in eastern Rafah to evacuate immediately, warning soldiers will operate with, quote, extreme force. David, as you know, more than 1 million Palestinians went to Rafah to avoid the fighting, and now some are on the move yet again. Meanwhile, tonight, Israel and Hamas both saying they will be sending delegations back to Cairo for more talks on a potential ceasefire deal. David.
A lot of moving parts tonight. Marcus Moore in Tel Aviv. Marcus, thank you. Meanwhile, back here in the U.S. and the new fallout from the campus protests over the war. Tonight, Columbia now canceling its university-wide commencement. And in California tonight, more than 100 arrested in campus crackdowns there. Stephanie Ramos on us again tonight.
Just days after Columbia University called in the NYPD to take back campus from protesters and to clear this lawn for graduation, the school now canceling the main ceremony, citing security concerns. Graduates telling us they're disappointed.
I have friends whose families are coming from places like Singapore, France, Mexico, and other countries around the world who've spent thousands of dollars on plane tickets, so it's definitely an incredible disappointment.
Columbia's not alone. Emory in Atlanta today moving graduation 20 miles off campus.
I'm just really sad. You know, in the year 2020, so the pandemic uprooted our entire senior year of high school. We didn't have a graduation for that, and then freshman year here was completely online.
It comes amid protests at graduations. On this Northeastern University live stream, students flashed messages on their phones calling on the school to divest from Israel. At the University of Michigan, students marching through the aisles. Overhead, a banner flown in support of Israel. After more than 2,400 arrests on dozens of campuses, tonight, new crackdowns. Police raiding an encampment at UC San Diego, arresting more than 60 people. UCLA today arrested more than 40 protesters in this school parking garage. And David, back here at Columbia University, even though the lawn is cleared, the university-wide graduation is canceled. The university saying they will focus on smaller ceremonies by school. Police do have authorization to be on campus through those graduation festivities, David.
Students who they were affected by the pandemic in high school, now affected by this in college. Stephanie, thank you. There is also news coming in tonight from Russia that an American soldier has been detained in Russia, accused of criminal misconduct, and what the U.S. is now saying at this hour. Here's our Chief Global Affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz tonight.
Tonight, another U.S. citizen behind bars in Russia, this time a U.S. soldier, Army Staff Sergeant Gordon Black. The Army confirming the soldier was detained by Russian authorities late last week in Vladivostok on charges of criminal misconduct. U.S. officials say Sergeant Black traveled to Russia on his own. He was not given permission. All Americans have been warned to avoid travel there and advised to leave if they are already in Russia. Sergeant Black's mother telling us tonight he had met a woman who was bartending near his Army base in South Korea, saying she was later deported to Russia where he was visiting her. The mother described the relationship as volatile. Russian television saying the charges against Black involve beating a woman and stealing from her. Black's arrest also comes as the U.S. is working to free wrongfully detained journalist Evan Gershkovich and businessman Paul Whelan. The State Department is trying to get consular access to Staff Sergeant Black, but has been unable to do so thus far. David?
Martha Raddatz with late reporting for us tonight. Martha, thank you. Meantime, in New York City tonight, the drama in court. President Trump's criminal trial, the judge telling Trump that the fines against him for violating that limited gag order are not working. Telling the former president jail is now a possibility. The judge telling Trump at the end of the day, I have a job to do. Aaron Katursky at the courthouse.
Tonight, Judge Juan Merchan putting Donald Trump on notice. If the former president violates the gag order one more time, he could be thrown in jail. Trump today held in criminal contempt for a 10th time for publicly criticizing the jury. He was slapped with yet another $1,000 fine, the maximum allowable. But the judge today acknowledging these fines are not serving as a deterrent and warned going forward, this court will have to consider a jail sentence. Judge Merchan then addressing Trump directly, the last thing I want to do is put you in jail, he said. You are the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. At the end of the day, I have a job to do. Outside court, Trump defiant.
Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day.
Jurors today for the first time seeing the documents at the heart of the case. Trump accused of illegally falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her story of their alleged affair from voters before the 2016 election. The payment to Daniels was made by Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen. Today, the Trump Organization's controller testified he was ordered to reimburse Cohen by Trump's chief financial officer Alan Weisselberg. Then, with Trump's bookkeeper on the witness stand, jurors saw the allegedly phony invoices Cohen submitted, the ledger entries that classified the reimbursements to him as legal expenses, and the checks from Trump's own bank account that he signed while in the White House. And if Trump didn't want to sign a check, the bookkeeper testified he would simply scribble void in black Sharpie on it and send it right back. On cross-examination, the defense suggested these were legit legal expenses because Michael Cohen was Trump's lawyer. And they asked the bookkeeper, you never had any reason to believe President Trump was hiding anything? She said no. Tonight, David, prosecutors say they have about 2 weeks left before they rest their case. David,
2 weeks to go on the prosecution side. Aaron, thank you. Now to the difficult video, those heart-stopping moments inside a Pennsylvania church. A suspect approaching the front of the church, suddenly aiming a handgun right at the pastor. Tonight, the pastor calling it a miracle. No one was killed. Here's Eva Pilgrim.
Tonight, this heart-stopping moment captured on a church live stream just outside of Pittsburgh. A man pulling a gun on a pastor in the middle of his sermon.
I'm thankful to God that I'm still here because he definitely pulled the trigger.
Pastor Glenn Germany was leading service at Jesus' Dwelling Place Church on Sunday. Authorities say the suspect, 26-year-old Bernard Jr. Polite, was sitting in the pews. Seconds later, the gunman walking up and pointing a loaded gun at the pastor. That gun jamming. Deacon Clarence McAllister quickly taking action, telling our affiliate WTAE.
Once they raised the gun up, I jumped up, got him from behind, struggled him down to the ground.
The deacon helping wrestle that gun away. Authorities taking the gunman into custody. They say hours later, police were called to his home, where they found a 56-year-old relative shot dead. An investigation is ongoing in that case, but so far, no charges filed.
Police say the gunman said that God told him to do it. He remains in jail tonight on multiple charges for that church incident. David?
Just horrifying video. Eva Pilgrim, thanks, Eva. Tonight, the ABC News exclusive here. Lindsay Davis, one-on-one with the former Fulton County prosecutor Nathan Wade, who is no longer on the case against Trump because of Wade's personal relationship with the DA in the case. Lindsay asking, did that personal relationship jeopardize the case against the former president?
The former top prosecutor, whose romantic relationship with Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis threatened to derail the prosecution of Donald Trump, is now defending himself.
Workplace romances are as American as apple pie. It happens to everyone, but it happened to the two of us.
Fonnie Willis hired Nathan Wade to lead the prosecution of Trump and 18 co-defendants for their alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. But they soon became romantically involved, and when one of the defendants got wind of it, he moved to have them disqualified from the case.
A Washington Post columnist wrote, what were they thinking? How could two seasoned attorneys embroiled in the prosecution of a former president start a romance and not see this trouble coming a mile away?
You don't plan to develop feelings. You don't plan to fall in love. You don't plan to have some relationship in the workplace. You don't set out to do that, and those things develop organically.
After weeks of delays and days of deeply personal testimony from both Willis and Wade, the judge found they'd engaged in a tremendous lapse in judgment, creating a significant appearance of impropriety. He ruled one of them would have to leave the case. Wade resigned that afternoon. I asked him if he has any regrets.
I regret that private matter became the focal point of this very important prosecution.
Do you think that you've done any kind of damage to this case?
None at all. None at all.
Even the public perception of it?
There again, this takes me back to the initial statement that I made. My private life became the focal point of the case. My private life has nothing to do with the merits of that prosecution.
David, for all the talk about his personal life, Wade says that he does believe a day of reckoning is coming for Trump. He goes a step further to say that a jury will, quote, do the right thing and convict Donald Trump. But at this point, a judge has yet to set a date for the trial to move forward. David?
All right, Lindsay, thanks so much. And by the way, you can see much more of Lindsay's exclusive interview tonight on ABC News Live and then later streaming on Hulu. In the meantime, when we come back here tonight, news coming in about an American and two friends, two brothers, all three found dead in Mexico. Tonight, a motive now revealed. We also have recalls involving two different kinds of planter's nuts and major news on Alzheimer's tonight in a moment. Tonight, hear the motive in the deaths of that American man and two friends, two brothers, all killed while in Mexico. American Jack Carter Road, who was to be married in just months, and Australian brothers Jake and Caleb Robinson, identified by family members now. Authorities now say they were shot and killed by suspects attempting to steal tires from their truck. 3 suspects are under arrest. When we come back, that news on Alzheimer's and the double gene found, and then the recalls tonight, 2 kinds of planter's nuts. To the index, a new Alzheimer's study finds 15% of patients who have 2 copies of the same gene, reinforcing findings that genetics can play a role in some cases. Researchers finding those with 2 copies of the gene known as APOE4 showed symptoms up to 10 years earlier than those who did not have 2 copies of the gene. It's in the journal Nature. Tonight, planters recalling 2 types of nuts for possible listeria contamination, 4-ounce packages of honey roasted peanuts, and 8.75-ounce cans of deluxe lightly salted mixed nuts. We do have more on our website. When we come back here to countdown at this hour, the Starliner about to blast off for the first time with astronauts in a moment. Finally tonight here, a little breaking news before we go. The countdown had been on for the historic launch of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. It was a critical test for Boeing and its ambitions in space, still is. Their capsule set to carry humans for the first time. Veteran NASA astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore on board. They were set to lift off from Cape Canaveral, Florida to the International Space Station, 10:34 Eastern. We've learned it's been called off for now. We'll have much more on this in the days ahead. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Tonight, Israel launching strikes in Rafah after Hamas said it has accepted a ceasefire proposal. Images of celebrations in Gaza following that announcement from Hamas that it agreed to terms presented by Egypt and Qatar. But Israel saying there's no deal yet and going ahead with strikes in Rafah, the southern Gaza city where it told nearly 100,000 people to evacuate. The uncertainty tonight. Also this evening, Donald Trump found in contempt again at his hush money trial for violating his partial gag order. The new threat from the judge to send him to jail. Severe storms on the move. Millions in the central U.S. under a rare high risk for tornadoes after the flooding in Texas that left a 4-year-old boy dead. The U.S. soldier detained in Russia, the crime he's accused of committing. Columbia University making a major announcement about its main graduation ceremony after weeks of protests and dramatic arrests. The frightening moments during a live stream sermon, a man pulling a gun on the pastor, but it fails to go off. How he was stopped. The final countdown after years of delays. Tonight, Boeing is set to launch its first crewed flight of its Starliner capsule. And a historic battleship like you've never seen before. Visitors flocking for a rare glimpse as it gets a makeover.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome. The news traveled fast in Gaza tonight, where celebrations broke out after word began to spread that Hamas had accepted a deal to end hostilities in Gaza. But hopes of a pause in the fighting were just as quickly shattered when Israel declared the deal Hamas was embracing was far from Israel's essential demands. And so instead of a deal tonight, Israel is raising the stakes, pressing forward on its threatened military operation in Rafah, potentially displacing 100,000 people who have been told to leave by the Israeli military as it increases pressure on Hamas. Tonight, though, diplomacy is still alive. Richard Engel is inside Israel.
In Gaza tonight, they're celebrating their salvation after Hamas announced it had accepted a sweeping ceasefire. But it seems they're celebrating too soon. Israel says there is no deal yet, that the terms Hamas accepted are far from Israel's necessary requirements and are not the original offer Israel had on the table. But Israel is dispatching a delegation to negotiate, while its war cabinet has also unanimously approved a targeted operation against Hamas in the southern city of Rafah. Our crew capturing it starting this morning.
There has been a response from Hamas to the hostage deal. We're currently reviewing that response.
While the details remain unclear, a senior Arab negotiator directly involved in the talks tells NBC News Hamas's position has shifted greatly over the past 48 hours, and that the deal Hamas says it accepts would see it free 33 hostages in exchange for a roughly 40-day ceasefire, followed by further hostage releases and the freeing of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. But the source notes, with Israel not at the most recent negotiations, Hamas agreed to its own terms, using its own interpretation of the offer. Israel believes 93 hostages captured on October 7th are still alive in Gaza, and that many of them are being held in Rafah, the only remaining city in Gaza where Israel has not yet conducted major ground operations. Israel this morning ordered roughly 100,000 Palestinians to evacuate from part of Rafah, using leaflets to announce that intense counterterrorism operations were about to begin. President Biden opposes a full-scale assault on Rafah because it is packed with more than 1 million civilians who fled there for their safety.
Richard, meanwhile, we've learned the White House has stopped a U.S. shipment of military aid to Israel.
This is a rare move, Lester. The White House blocking a large shipment of offensive weapons, including 2,000-pound bombs, just as Israel's intensifying military operations in Rafah. Two administration officials confirming it, but say that it does not reflect a shift in overall policy. The White House isn't commenting. Lester?
Richard Engel, thank you. Back at home, a Manhattan courtroom, a new fine imposed on former President Trump for violating the gag order in his hush money trial. Vaughn Hilliard reports on a sharp new warning from the judge.
Coke Studio, Season 15.
New warning from the judge.
Tonight, former President Trump facing a new threat of jail time at his hush money trial after his 10th violation of the judge's gag order.
He's taken away my constitutional right to speak.
The judge directly addressing the possibility of putting Mr. Trump behind bars over future violations. The magnitude of such a decision is not lost on me. You are the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. Adding, as much as I do not want to impose a jail sanction, I will, if necessary and appropriate.
Frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day.
The judge fining Mr. Trump an additional $1,000 for complaining about the jury in Deep Blue Manhattan, saying it's 95% Democrat. The judge saying the former president wrongfully called into question the integrity of the jury. Mr. Trump has pleaded not guilty to low-level felony charges for allegedly disguising reimbursements to Michael Cohen for hush money payments to Stormy Daniels as legal expenses in his company's internal business records. If convicted, Mr. Trump could face anywhere from 4 years in prison to just probation. Taking the stand this morning, Jeffrey McConney, who oversaw the Trump Organization's accounting department, striking at the heart of the prosecution's case of falsifying business records, testifying about invoices, describing the reimbursements as legal expenses, saying he was ordered by another Trump Organization executive to reimburse Cohen $420,000 for the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels, most from Mr. Trump's personal account. But on cross-examination, McConney said he had not spoken to Mr. Trump directly about the business records. Another Trump Organization employee, Deborah Tarasoff, testifying about Mr. Trump's process of signing checks, including to Cohen, which were shown to the jury, saying if he didn't want to sign it, he didn't sign it. It was signed in Sharpie, and it was black, and that's what he uses.
Yvonne, the prosecution also giving an indication of the timing of this case.
Yeah, Lester, prosecutors said they intend to call witnesses for about the next 2 weeks. At that point, Mr. Trump's team will be able to present its own defense. And of course, the question of whether the former president will take the stand himself. Lester?
All right, Vaughn Hilliard in New York tonight. Thank you. There is a new severe weather threat we're following tonight after that flooding emergency in Texas led to more than 600 rescues in the Houston area alone. Officials said 2 people were killed, including a 4-year-old boy. The flooding left homes submerged, cars floating, and lives upended. Bill Cairns is here. Bill, conditions are really ripe for another tough night.
Lester, we only have these high-risk tornado days about 1 or 2 times a year. In the next 12 hours, that's the heart of it for this event. And we're really focusing in here on areas from Oklahoma into southern Kansas. That's where we not only have a chance of tornadoes, but even strong tornadoes, and they could occur well after the sun sets too through the evening. So here's where we're watching for watches now, all the way from Omaha southward. We have what we call a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch till 11 p.m. That includes Oklahoma City and Wichita. Already a couple tornado warnings there now, and it should ramp up as we go through the evening. As 11 p.m. rolls around, that's when the line of storms will arrive at Kansas City, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City. And Lester, we're not done. We're going to deal with this storm system through the night, and then we're going to have a chance of severe storms the next 2 days right to the heartland.
What a wild spring we've had. Bill Cairns, thank you very much. There's word tonight that a U.S. soldier has been detained in Russia. Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cuby has late details. Courtney, what do we know?
Yeah, Lester, according to the U.S. Army, Staff Sergeant Gordon Black was detained in Russia on Thursday, accused of stealing. Now, he was stationed at a base in South Korea, but was actually traveling back to the United States at the end of his tour when he stopped in Russia to see a woman he had a romantic relationship with. Officials here say he went to Russia without permission from his superiors. Now, the U.S. State Department currently warns Americans not to travel to Russia, saying 2 other Americans are being wrongfully detained, Paul Whelan and journalist Evan Gershkovich. Staff Sergeant Black is currently being held in pretrial confinement. Lester?
Courtney Cuby, thank you. With campus protests over the fighting in Gaza showing no signs of easing around the country, Columbia University today became the latest school to cancel its main commencement ceremony. Maggie Vespa now with late developments.
The tidal wave of protests on America's college campuses now colliding with commencement season. Columbia University today canceling its main graduation, opting instead for individual school ceremonies.
It's been a tough time, honestly. It's been really, I think it's been demoralizing.
Free Palestine! Also tonight, Emory University announcing it will move its main commencement off campus, citing safety concerns.
Why are you doing that?
Last month, police clashed with demonstrators there. Meanwhile, commencement season marked by disruptions. A pro-Palestinian protester covered in fake blood stormed Northeastern University's stage this weekend, while demonstrators marched through the University of Michigan's ceremony. At UCLA today, dozens of arrests. Demonstrators calling on the school to divest from Israel, marching and holding sit-ins. The administration saying classes would move fully remote the same day campus was supposed to be back to business as usual after police cleared an encampment there last week. Today, officers called in to clear tents at UC San Diego, police arresting 64 protesters. NBC News now tracking protests at more than 75 campuses nationwide, arrests close to 2,500. Protesters at the University of Chicago erecting a fence around their camp after negotiations with the administration collapsed overnight. Faculty calling on the school to avoid bringing in police.
Our most immediate concern is for the well-being of our students. We don't want them getting beat up just because they're camping on the lawn.
The school saying students' demands were inconsistent with the university's principles.
We're not going away. We're not giving up the fight.
And Maggie joining us now from the campus of the University of Chicago. Maggie, there was a deadline there for students to leave the encampment. Where does that stand?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. Students back there tell us the administration ordered them out by midnight last night. So at this point, they say they're just bracing for police intervention. Meanwhile, the school isn't commenting on next steps. Lester?
Maggie Vespa, thank you. Now to the frightening moment at a church in Pennsylvania. A man pulling a gun and about to shoot a pastor when the gun fails to go off. And all of it playing out on live stream. Emily Aketa now with the video, and we have to warn you, it is disturbing.
A whole different kingdom of God.
Minutes into the Sunday sermon outside of Pittsburgh, Pastor Glenn Germany suddenly found himself staring down the barrel of a gun. The heart-stopping moments captured on the church's live stream. You can make out the gun jamming.
This morning when I woke up, man.
A close call bringing the pastor to tears.
I'm seeing, what happened, and I'm totally grateful, but I'm really starting to process it right now.
A fast-acting church deacon jumped in to help. The two seen wrangling the gun from the attacker's hands, who allegedly told police that God told him to do it. The pastor's wife watched in horror.
You ask yourself, is this really happening?
26-year-old Bernard Polite, who told authorities he didn't know the pastor, has been charged with attempted homicide, aggravated assault, and reckless endangerment. Just hours after the incident at the church, Polite's family made a grisly discovery less than a mile away at his home. His older cousin, Derek Polite, had been fatally shot. No charges have been filed in that investigation yet, but Germany says it makes his narrow escape all the more surreal.
This is not less than a miracle because I truly see that gun being pointed at me.
A relative tells me the suspect has a history of mental illness, but the family is shocked by Sunday's violence. It's unclear if he has an attorney. Lester?
Emily Aketa, thank you. In 60 seconds, a new investigation into Boeing over one of their popular jets following inspection concerns. Plus, counting down to tonight's crucial test flight of Boeing's crewed Starliner spacecraft. Right after this.
SRB chamber pressure.
Just in, the FAA announcing an investigation involving yet another Boeing plane, the 787 Dreamliner, just as Boeing Space is preparing to launch astronauts in a brand new spaceship tonight. NBC's Tom Costello was at the Kennedy Space Center. Tom, good evening.
Lester, the FAA looking into whether Boeing checked the work to make sure the wings are properly attached to the 787 fuselage, and whether Boeing employees falsified documents claiming they checked the work when they hadn't. Boeing says this is not a safety of flight issue. It will inspect the fleet. In the meantime, 2 astronauts preparing to board and ride a Starliner spaceship. Years behind arch-rival SpaceX, Boeing's Starliner spaceship is tonight perched atop a powerful Atlas V rocket. High stress and high stakes as two astronauts become the first to ride Starliner into orbit.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Pilot Sunita Williams and Commander Butch Wilmore, Navy test pilots and NASA veterans, have been training for years. But Starliner is over budget and years overdue. And like its commercial aircraft, quality control at Boeing is in the spotlight. During the 2019 uncrewed test flight, Starliner's internal clocks were misprogrammed, off by 11 hours. Mission control forced to abort, later learning Starliner could have crashed into the space station. Last June, more delays. Engineers discovered flammable tape inside the capsule and parachute straps that might not hold.
You know, that adage you've heard since Apollo 13, failure's not an option.
The good news, an uncrewed mission did reach the station in 2022. Does this spaceship feel like it's ready for prime time?
I feel like we're ready to go, and the spacecraft is ready to go.
Starliner set to lift off at 10:34 p.m. Eastern Time for a 10-day test flight. Lester?
Okay, Tom, thank you. Up next, the massive car company you've never heard of in China and why they're out to lap the rest of the electric vehicle field. Will we see them on the road here soon? We're back now with our series, The Future of the Road. In the battle for the electric car market, one company in China is leading the charge with cheaper models. But could it disrupt sales here in the U.S.? Let's get more from Janice Mackey-Freyer.
In the competitive world of Chinese electric vehicles, looking for a spot that are going further and costing less than ever before, no company makes or sells more than BYD, the Chinese giant taking on Tesla, offering cars for as little as $10,000.
Let's drive.
Along with higher-priced luxury models.
0 to 60 miles per hour in about 3 seconds. Anything like this in the U.S.?
Nothing I drove.
But don't look for electric cars from BYD on American roads anytime soon.
U.S. government need to be more friendly.
Stella Lee is the CEO steering BYD's expansion in the Americas. In an exclusive interview, she said the U.S. is not part of the plan, yet.
They're not ready. But then for BYD, we are ready.
What conditions would need to exist in order to consider an entry into the U.S. market?
That's a good question. You should go back to ask the DCO.
BYD faces stiff hurdles in the U.S., including a 25% tariff on imports, and pushback from U.S. automakers who see Chinese competition as a major threat.
I think it's going to require trade restrictions for a limited period of time, which will allow the Western automakers and the U.S. automakers to catch up.
Even Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who just made a surprise visit to Beijing to meet officials,
it's good to see electric vehicles making progress in China,
said that without trade barriers, Chinese EVs will, quote, demolish other car companies. BYD began as a battery manufacturer, and with the help of government subsidies, now controls every mile of its low-cost supply chain from parts to shipping. Among the concerns of U.S. automakers and lawmakers, that BYD's plan to build a factory in Mexico could allow the company to skirt tariffs under free trade rules. BYD denies that's the goal, and U.S. officials say there are growing fears China could use smart car technology to spy on American drivers.
What did you make of the Biden administration opening an investigation into smart car technology because of national security concerns that this technology was coming from China?
I don't understand. There's no data approve that.
National security concerns are overblown?
Overblown, oversensitive, and misleading.
BYD alone is producing more than 3 million cars a year, with capacity for more, and few signs of slowing down. Janice Mackey-Freyer, NBC News, Shenzhen.
When we come back, Extreme Makeover Battleship Edition, inside the country's most decorated warship like you've never seen it before. Finally, the historic U.S. battleship getting a makeover and giving visitors a rare chance to see it in a whole new way. Here's Joe Fryer.
The word underbelly often suggests something sordid, but viewing the underside of this ship is simply breathtaking.
The average person never gets a chance to see something like this.
After floating down the Delaware, Battleship New Jersey is now like a duck out of water, dry docked for maintenance in Philadelphia, where she's getting 3 fresh coats of paint, nearly 3,000 gallons. That hasn't happened in decades.
She's 887 foot 7 inches long.
Brian Szymanski is curator of the ship, which is also a museum. Right now, there's a lot more of her to see, like the exposed propellers.
One of the most common reactions is, can I touch it?
The answer is yes.
I actually can. There we go.
Visitors are coming from all over the world to go under the 45,000-ton vessel, which is propped up on keel blocks.
It's incredible. And when you do get to see it, it takes your breath away.
She's the nation's most decorated battleship, the only one to see service during the Vietnam War. Kenneth Kerr served aboard as a Navy machinist back then, and is now a volunteer here.
Vietnam veterans come aboard, and I've actually seen this, where they get down, can kiss the deck, and say that if it wasn't for this ship, they wouldn't be alive today. That just touches you.
When the work's done, the ship will return to the water and to Camden, New Jersey, where that history will live on. Joe Fryer, NBC News.
That's Nightly News for this Monday. Thank you for watching. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
Counting has got underway after Chadians voted in a long-delayed presidential election that is set to end 3 years of military rule under interim President Mohamed Déby Itno. Reuters is reporting that security forces have been deployed amid rising tensions in opposition-friendly neighborhoods of the capital N'Djamena. But voting day was mostly peaceful. It took place in good conditions. It was calm and the elections were transparent. So we congratulate the organizers on the smooth coordination. Also the defense and security forces. There were 10 candidates on the ballot, but the incumbent president is expected to win the vote, extending his family's decades-long rule. But not everyone is happy with the way voting went. I've been here since 6:50 in the morning. I looked for my name in vain. I looked everywhere and I didn't find it. So I don't know how this was organized, but on all the lists my name wasn't there. So I don't know what to do. Am I going to vote or not? This really hurts me. But it's my right to vote, absolutely. I have to vote. Chad is seen as one of the West's last remaining stable allies, following a wave of military coup in the Sahel region.
The death toll in Kenya's devastating floods has risen to at least 228. The government spokesman Isaac Mura said Sunday that more than 223,000 people have been affected by the floods. Authorities continue to enforce the evacuation order that was issued on May 2nd. In Nairobi County alone, 163,210 residents have been evacuated from riparian areas as the government rent alternative accommodation. This figure accounts for forcible or voluntary evacuations. Isaac Mura insisted that the country remains safe for tourism. This comes after holidaymakers and staff were evacuated from the Masai Mara National Reserve in southwestern Kenya last week. Weeks of heavier than usual seasonal rains, compounded by natural weather phenomena such as El Niño and naturally occurring climate systems such as the Indian Ocean Dipole, have caused chaos across East Africa.
Your new house. New house.
This family from Congo are being shown to their new home in the United States for the first time. A volunteer from a local church was at the apartment door to welcome them.
Being the richest country in the world, I think it's really incumbent upon us to welcome people to this country, especially from like the Congo.
They pay close attention as a translator walks them through everything they need to know about their apartment. We're happy wherever they take us, we're just happy.
Saturday. Time.
He was just 3 when he fled with his family to a refugee camp in Tanzania, where he lived until just a few weeks ago.
What we really do at the end of the day is self-sufficiency and integration. And so any service that where they need help integrating into the U.S., becoming self-sufficient. So again, employment, schooling, housing, and basic needs like food and clothing.
Scenes like this are becoming more common as the U.S. refugee program rebounds from cutbacks under former President Donald Trump's administration.
A lot of people just assume that all refugees have come across the border, which of course is not the reality at all, where they're actually flying in through, to our airport and coming through legal pathways.
People say the growing number of refugees have generally been welcomed by communities like this one.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Tens of thousands of people, many displaced, have started packing up their bags in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. This week, the Israeli military ordered their evacuation with the long-promised and highly controversial imminent ground invasion. Around 1.4 million civilians relocated to Rafah to escape fighting. Now they have to flee for their lives once again. We are a people today who only have God to help us. We have no shelter, no food, no water, none of that. We were promised by the Israeli army and the international community that Rafah will be protected, and that is why we came to Rafah, but regrettably they informed us of the evacuation, or else we will face something that no one wishes to face. Israel's army wrote on social media it would act with extreme force against militants and urged the population to evacuate immediately. In Rafah, people received flyers in Arabic from the IDF suggesting they should flee to Al-Mawasi, which would include expanded hospitals, tents, food, water, and other supplies. We read it in the leaflet. We don't know where to go. We were displaced from Gaza City, and now we don't know where to go. They dropped the leaflet, and we don't know how to process it. We have children, my wife, my mother, the family, and all of us don't know where to go. The news comes as the latest round of ceasefire talks between Hamas and Israel fails.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.